Good evening and welcome to the ABC's Election Centre at South Bank in Brisbane. I'm Jessica Van Vonderen.
And I'm Matt Wordsworth. Tonight, it promises to be an election like no other. We could be in for another cliffhanger.
More than 3.1 million Queenslanders are enrolled to vote and decide who will sit in the 93 seats in the Queensland Parliament. The magic number tonight, 47. That's the amount of seats needed for a majority government. Any less, and we're looking at another hung parliament where minor parties like One Nation could play a crucial role.
Lots changed in Queensland since the last time we were doing this, Jess. There are new seats, there's been a drastic shake-up of the electoral boundaries, and even changes to the way we fill out the ballot paper, making this the most unpredictable election in Australia in years.
Fortunately, we have Anthony Green on board to wade through the numbers and make sense of the results. Anthony, you've covered 11 Queensland elections now. This one promises to be a doozy.
Yes, it certainly does. In fact, my 11th, I remember my first one in 1989. There was great controversy when a 21-year-old Lawrence Springborg was chosen to run in Carnarvon. And it's the only time that Gundawindi Argus didn't actually recommend a vote for the National Party, I think, from memory. And he's retiring at this election, so it shows you how long we've been doing these elections.
Well, Anthony, let's just get a state of play. Take us through the chamber and the seats that you want to watch tonight.
Well, what's happened is that the redistribution has been quite major. Now, I'll bring up my touchscreen here. It's not being very touchy tonight, so I'm having to use a mouse, if anyone's wondering why we're doing it slightly differently. A slight technical fail. But here's the new chamber for 93 seats. We've taken all the results from last time, and we've adjusted them for the new boundaries, and we've adjusted them for people who've resigned from the party or switched party or are retiring. And we're saying the starting point is Labor with 46 seats, the LNP with 42, One Nation, which is Steve Dixon in Buderim having deserted the LNP, the Katters Australian Party 2, and the two others are currently, we've listed are Rob Pine and the member of Palmerston, Rick Wallace. Peter Wellington's retiring. We've classed his seat as LNP held, which it will be without him there. So that's our starting point. Labor needs to win a net at least one seat. The LNP need to win a net 5 seats. And we've got how many of these balance of power seats will we see determining potentially what's the next government of Queensland.
Thanks, Anthony. Look forward to your call tonight. Well, now to our panel. Environment Minister Stephen Miles. His seat was abolished in the electoral redistribution, and so he's moved to Murrumba, north of Brisbane. Deb Frecklington is the LNP's Deputy Leader in the safe seat of Nanango. Welcome to the panel.
Thank you, Jess.
And on our other side, to crunch the numbers, National Senator Matt Canavan and former State Labor Secretary, now Senator Anthony Chisholm. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hey, Matt.
All right, Stephen Miles, let's start with you. How confident are you feeling tonight?
I've had a really good day on the polling booths, and certainly the people I've been talking to across the state have also reported a pretty positive response. So the polls have indicated that we've done pretty well in this campaign.
Anthony's saying you need a net gain of 1 seat. Is that on the cards, do you think, tonight?
I certainly think you'll see us gain seats, but there are also seats we're concerned about losing. And so what we're unlikely to see is one party or the other only lose or gain seats. I think this really is going to be a tale of many local campaigns.
What was the mood for you, Deb Frecklington?
Well, I think it was, look, it was interesting out in Nanango, Jess. I think it's outside of Brisbane, it is quite different feel. I think Stephen's right in that there is 93 different seats in this election, and I think we'll see that. I think we'll see really different swings up in North Queensland as well, and that'll be really interesting to watch.
Do you think you've done enough?
Look, we've run an amazing campaign, and I'm really pleased to be sitting here today at the end of a long 4 weeks. But we've run a really good campaign, Jess, and looking forward to seeing some of the results come in.
OK, let's go over to our number crunchers. Anthony Chisholm, you were State Secretary for 3 elections, wasn't it? So you know full well where the seats that you need to win are. So what are you looking for and at tonight?
I certainly think that you will get some different results in regional Queensland compared to the southeast. So from a Labor point of view, we're really looking to ensure that we minimise the damage in the regions and maybe even pick up a seat like Burdekin or Whitsunday. And then we're obviously optimistic about the southeast corner and think that we can make some gains in the southeast corner and hopefully be on the defensive in a seat like Palmerston and hold on to that.
Right, and so One Nation is threatening you in Thuringowa. What about that? Are you worried about that one too?
Yeah, I spent some time in Townsville during the week, And certainly the closer I drove from Cairns to Townsville, and the closer you got to Townsville, there certainly was an anti-major party feeling there. So I think you will get some swings in Townsville area, but whether it's enough to tip out a Labor MP, because I don't think it's going to go to the LNP. So I think their primary is going to go backwards in regional Queensland and in the southeast corner. It might go to One Nation instead.
Where are you in danger, Matt Canavan?
Well, I think it is a tale of two states, as Anthony has said. The vote we're seeing in regional Queensland is going to be very different. The LNP has a number of seats to defend in regional Queensland, where One Nation has said they'll preference against us, so that could make it difficult.
Can you name those?
So Burdekin, Nanango, I think you'll be right, Deb. But Whitsunday and Hitchinbrook are all difficult for the LNP for different reasons. But all that decision of One Nation is to preference against sitting MPs. It'll be interesting to see the preference flows in those seats. That'll be key. And then for the Labor Party in regional Queensland, they'll need to get their primary vote high enough to keep seats like they want. They certainly swing against Labor in the regions, and they just need to, if their primary gets into that mid to low 30s, they could be in danger of not getting to 50.
Who had the momentum coming into today? We did see a news poll with Labor with their nose in front. Is that the reading you guys are getting?
Well, look, I don't think the polls have changed much. You know, when you look at it from the start to the end, they've pretty much stayed where they were. We've seen a drop off in the One Nation minor party vote. It's come back pretty equally to the major parties. That often happens. Look, I think it's always going to be difficult for the LNP to beat a first-term government. As you can see from Anthony's analysis, Labor start this ahead, and it's a mountain to climb for any opposition.
I certainly think the faux pas from Tim Nicholls yesterday in regards to an LNP and One Nation government was certainly a big problem for him that I think played out in the final 24 hours before election day, and that's not when you want to make a mistake.
A tiny slip of the tongue enough to turn things around?
I think it was a slip of the tongue on probably the dominant issue of the last 10 days, which is the LNP relationship with One Nation.
And just Stephen Miles, quickly, the southeast corner, obviously big battleground. Quickly, what are the seats that Labor think that they can gain, and what are the ones where they're vulnerable?
Look, there's a range of seats where we start off ahead, places like Mansfield, Mount Ommaney, Glasshouse.
LNP electorates there, yep.
That's right. Yep. Currently held by the LNP, but notionally Labor on the redistributed figures. So you'd certainly be looking to those seats as potential gains. And then a range of other seats where we've run really strong campaigns, and we'd expect some of them to fall our way. Seats like Gavin and Bonnie on the Gold Coast, around Brisbane, even seats like Redlands, Everton, maybe Aspley, maybe Maywar. So there's a range of seats where...
You're quite hopeful tonight.
Certainly, I think there's a whole bunch of seats in the southeast where we've got great candidates and run great campaigns, and we don't need to win all of them, but if we win some of them, we're in really good shape.
All right. Well, you're with Queensland Votes on ABC TV and radio, and we have reporters at the key locations tonight all around the state. Firstly, the Premier's camp is at Oxley, and political reporter Josh Bavis is there. Leonie Mellor is in Brisbane CBD at the Liberal National Party function.
And reporter Alison Horn is in Butterham, where One Nation State Leader Steve Dixon has been joined by Pauline Hanson, where his political future is on the line. But Josh, let's start with you. You've been following the campaign. How would you describe the mood of the Labor supporters and candidates you've been talking to?
Well, Matt, what a campaign it's been. Can you believe that we've made it through these last 4 weeks and here we are? It's been a time where baby booties, Adani protesters and even a broken down plane almost derailed the Premier's campaign. It all began with that first stump speech where those protesters tried to steal the stage from the Premier. But things have begun to turn around over the last couple of days, ever since her campaign launch on the Gold Coast just a few days ago. The Premier has remained on point and on message. Even just a few days ago, the Premier was making an impassioned plea to lifetime LNP supporters to give her a chance just this once. So will voters return the Premier to a second term in office, or will they oust her out? I guess we're about to find out.
Thanks, Josh. Leonie Mellor, over to you. What's the feeling in the LNP camp?
Well, there's certainly some nervousness. I'm told Tim Nicholls feels a little bit nervous tonight. The election campaign is just so unpredictable. No one really knows what is going to happen. I'm told he's still quietly confident or hoping for a majority, even though those polls would seem to suggest otherwise. Tim Nicholls cast his vote in his safe electorate of Clayfield earlier today and was all but set upon by Adani protesters. Now, Adani has been a key issue of this campaign, plaguing both the major parties. Well, this morning, those protesters sought out Tim Nicholls and virtually upstaged him as he spoke to the media outside. He'll be hoping for a smoother run tonight. He's going to go to an event in his electorate of Clayfield just to thank supporters and volunteers. Then he'll stop by the tally room at the LNP headquarters before coming here to the Novotel, where he'll bunker down for what's expected to be a very long night.
Yeah, it could be. Thanks, Leonie Mellor. Now, Alison, have Steve Dixon and Pauline Hanson arrived yet? Is there any indication in the crowd that they're feeling confident?
Not yet, Matt, but the people here at the One Nation Party are incredibly positive. As you can see, this isn't your usual function centre as you would see at the ALP or the LNP camp. This is, in fact, a house party tonight, and this is quite indicative of what the One Nation campaign has been like pretty much through the entire 4 weeks of campaigning. They say it's been a very grassroots, no fuss, no frills campaign. We've seen the Battler bus heading out across regional Queensland. Interestingly, though, it's been Pauline Hanson, the leader of One Nation, and not Steve Dixon, the Queensland leader, who we've seen has been the face of One Nation's campaign, particularly in the regions. The party tonight is hoping it will pick up a handful of seats, and if that does eventuate, well, there's a very real chance that One Nation could hold the balance of power.
Thank you, Alison Horn. Well, Deb Freckling, we just heard from the One Nation camp there. What's your reading? How many seats could One Nation pick up tonight?
Well, Jess, I think it'll be really interesting, and like the Senator Canavan said, it will be dependent upon the preference flows in those seats. We've seen many of our regional seats where One Nation have preference Labor, a very interesting move for that party. So I don't know whether that will go against them in some of those seats or work in Labor's favour. I'm not sure what deal they did to get those preference flows to on those, but so it will be very interesting. I'm not sure how many seats that will go to One Nation, but of course we're very confident in many of the seats that people are saying One Nation should be in. For example, Lockyer, we've got a great candidate there, Jim McDonald, who's been working very hard on the ground. So
Steve Dixon was saying 5 to 10 earlier in the campaign. Do you think that's realistic?
Look, tonight will tell, but I think that's slightly optimistic.
It has been the issue that just hasn't gone away for the LNP in terms of being able to clearly articulate an answer about what the LNP would do in a minority government situation. Do you want to give that another go tonight?
Well, look, Jess, I think the difference between the LNP and the Labor government here on that exact point is that we've been upfront and honest with Queenslanders, and Tim Nicholls has very clearly said that we'll deal with the parliament that Queensland gives us. And I think we've got to remember back to prior to the 2015 election where Anastasia Palaszczuk said she'd do no deals, and then she went straight in and did deals with the minor parties and the independents. So,
but do you think it has been one of those issues which has just kept knocking you off track every day? And, Anastasia Palaszczuk has been reminding you of it every day as well. It's just something that's been dogging the campaign.
I think Anastasia's had her own issues in relation to the campaign, but this issue, I think we have to be honest with Queenslanders and say we will deal with the parliament that is given to us.
Stephen Miles, is there anything wrong with Tim Nicholls saying, look, he doesn't control who votes for One Nation. If there's a seat there, he just has to deal with the parliament he's given, much like Julia Gillard in the 2010 hung parliament at the federal level?
I think we'll see tonight if there's something wrong with having taken that position, but I think you're right. It really has defined this campaign, and in the final nearly 2 weeks, was really the big question of the election. What you really had here basically all year was 2 competing strategies. The LNP realising they couldn't win in their own right, but counting on holding about the same number of seats they have and One Nation making up the difference. Labor being of the view that if we could demonstrate to the public that that was their plan, they would lose votes both in the southeast, where people were concerned about a coalition with One Nation, and in the regions where potentially One Nation voters would not want to be electing Tim Nicholls. And tonight we'll find out which of us was right.
It hasn't been entirely smooth sailing, though, for Labor either, has it? We saw Joanne Miller, the Labor member for Bundamba, being very friendly and cosy with Pauline Hanson. How much did that annoy, shall I say, for want of a better word, the Labor people behind the scenes?
Look, I think Pauline pulled off a pretty successful stunt there with Joanne. And
Joanne was the one with the booties. You sure it wasn't her?
I think it was Pauline who benefited, but sure, that was a distraction on that one day. But if you compare that to what was effectively 3 errors from Tim Nicholls on that particular topic, the first one, he was rescued by Pauline effectively. If that event with Joanne Miller hadn't have happened, then his decision to pass on the question on Nova really would have led the day. So she saved him on that one. But then when he accidentally encouraged people to vote for their LNP One Nation candidate.
I think that's taking it a bit far. I don't think he quite said that.
Well, he almost said that. That's pretty clear.
That's what you wanted to hear.
It's what Queenslanders heard, I thought. But also when he couldn't give Karl Stefanovic a straight answer despite being asked 5 times in a row. I think those 3 moments made the last week really difficult for the LNP.
OK, well, one of the big wildcards, obviously, One Nation. We're not quite sure what their vote's going to be, but we do know there's been a big change to the preferences that get allocated and distributed because it's now compulsory. Anthony Chisholm, what change will it make, given that now it's not just optional, it's compulsory to preference?
Well, it's obviously going to mean that you can win off a really low primary vote, and that's what we're going to see tonight. So I think an example from the last election was Bruce Saunders, who won Maryborough. I think his primary vote was in the 20s. He was probably the only MP to win last time with a primary vote in the 20s. But I'd say tonight there's going to be a lot of them, a lot of people on both sides that are going to have a primary vote in the 20s, but it'll get across the line. And the further you get away from Brisbane, the more likely that is to be.
Is it going to come down more in your favour, having compulsory preferential voting, or the LNP?
Well, obviously, I think it'll help us in some places and it might hurt us in others. But I think overall, I think if you've run the stronger campaign, like I think Labor has, I think they're more likely to get a better preference flow as a result.
I mean, let's be clear, the Labor Party reintroduced compulsory preferential voting because they saw it was in their interest. It wasn't some considered, detailed reform. It was a midnight strike to try and shore up their vote in Brisbane from Greens' preferences in seats like where Stephen is now. That will help Labor in Brisbane, shore up the left side of the vote, if you like, with compulsory preferential voting. But it has had a counterproductive effect for the Labor Party because in the regions now, with the emergence of One Nation, that means you'll probably see the LNP hold a lot of seats on the back of Labor preferences, which may not have been forthcoming if compulsory preferential voting hadn't been reintroduced.
Well, I think we got some early
one point on this quickly is we are preferencing One Nation last, whereas the LNP aren't in 49
but
seats.
you're happy to take One Nation preferences.
They make their own decision, but this is a really important point. We have made a principled decision to put them last.
And we put the Greens
We will
last.
not deal with them to form a government. Whereas this mob will.
All right, we can continue this conversation after we get some early results. Anthony Green, you've got some early figures.
Yes, I should say one of the peculiarities of Queensland elections is they have vast numbers of joint polling places which collect votes for more than one electorate. And they might take 1,000 in one electorate and they take 20 or 30 or 40 or 200 in the next one. And we've got some very early results. In Gympie, we've got 21 votes. It's Kilkivian, which is not inside the electorate. It's one of these external joint booths. And the next one is Coomera. Well, let's not just go through that, but it's Coomera. We've got, 20 votes. This is from Windaroo, which is, again, it's outside the electorate. We're going to get a few of these very early on where they've taken 20 votes in a joint polling booth outside of the electorate and reported it. So we'll start getting these results through, but they're not very meaningful at this stage.
OK, thanks, Anthony. Yes, so obviously One Nation's going to play a big role in this. Anthony Chisholm, Maryborough, you're mentioning Bruce Saunders. Is that going to be one of those seats that falls to One Nation tonight?
Well, it's actually a seat that I spent some time in with Anastasia and Federal Labor leader Bill Shorten, and unlike the other mob, who we're happy to have the Federal Labor leader in town. And it was actually a remarkable reception that they got there. And I think that was a real turning point for Anastasia on the campaign when she made that announcement around jobs in Maryborough. I think it did set the Labor campaign on a really positive message around jobs that they focus in on to election day. And it was also when we started to see the LNP struggle to deal with that One Nation issue. So for me, Maryborough is a real turning point, and Bruce has done a remarkable job, and I think he is a chance to hold on against the odds.
Thanks, Senator. Well, all predictions are that this election will be tight. Veteran political journalist Barry Cassidy will be on hand tomorrow morning at 9 with a special Insiders program dissecting what Queenslanders have decided. Thanks for joining us, Barry.
My pleasure.
Barry, what are you looking for tonight?
Well, I'll be paying particular attention, as a lot of people will be, to the One Nation vote, not just to get a sense of how strong the One Nation vote is, but how that impacts on the major parties. There are 3 seats, I think, federally: Capricornia, Dawson and Flynn, where I think the local members will be keeping a very close eye on it as well. And if it was to go badly for the LNP, if One Nation was to get a particularly strong vote in that area, then potentially it could create a bit of panic. You know, that Galaxy exit poll that was conducted after the polls during the day, during the afternoon, it's pretty much spot on news poll. But what's interesting about it, 52-48. That's 37% Labor, 35% LNP, 9% Green, 13% One Nation, just as News Poll said. But the interesting thing about it is that that's a 3% swing to Labor in the southeast of in the southeast of the state, and a 3% swing against them in the rest of the state. But the important thing to keep in mind there is 2/3 of the seat are in that southeast corner. So you'd think Labor would be reasonably happy about that result.
And of course, the one word that's been dominating a lot of the campaign has been the word Adani. What impact do you think it's had?
Well, it's that's another one that we need to wait and see what the result has been. Because Adani is not just a state issue, it's a federal issue. But in this election campaign, not only the politicians but the media seemed anxious to make it an issue. So let's see where it bites, and whether, again, you get that kind of 3% swing to Labor in the southeast and a swing against them in the regions. They might follow that issue in precisely those terms. You know, it was interesting when Sky conducted that People's Forum in Brisbane, and David Spears asked an audience of 100 people whether any of them actually supported subsidies to the Adani mine, government subsidies. Not a single hand went up. So that suggests that certainly that the LNP might have overestimated support for the mine in Brisbane, though I'm sure they've got a strong handle on what the view is beyond Brisbane.
All right, thanks, Barry. We'll come back to you later in the night.
Okay.
There's no doubt that social media plays a huge role in election campaigns for candidates keen to spread their message directly to like-minded voters. Facebook and Twitter are both cheap and effective. For researchers and reporters, social media is a goldmine of information. So tonight we've set up a social media hub here in the ABC Election Centre to pull together a picture of what's been happening on social media this election. ABC reporter Louisa Rebgetz is on the case.
That's right, Matt, and welcome to the Social Media Hub, which will tonight look at some of the trends, look at some of the data that we can see from social media, and also some of those big issues that have dominated social media over the election campaign. And to talk me through some of those issues is Axel Bruns, a social media commentator from QUT. Axel, thank you for joining us tonight. Now, firstly, this is research that you've conducted, and it's a graph looking at the major topics on Twitter throughout the election campaign, the blue representing Adani, and this is a timeline down the bottom. What does this tell us about the major issues dominating?
Really what we're seeing from this is that at the start of the campaign there was a lot of debate about the Adani mine, and that really dominated the first week or two of the campaign, and then things shifted from there. I think the Premier's announcement that she would veto the loan if it came to it moved the issue away a little bit from Labour, diffused the issue to some extent, and at the same time the LNP announcement of its preference direction shifted the debate much further towards a discussion of One Nation, of the potential role that One Nation could play in the new parliament. So over the last couple of weeks of the campaign, we really saw a lot of debate about One Nation itself.
Now, this next graph is looking at mentions per party on Twitter. So how often the ALP, for example, is mentioned on Twitter. And you'll see here that that's a huge amount compared to the other parties, the LNP and One Nation.
That's right. So we tracked all the candidates on Twitter and how often they were mentioned. And the first part of this is not actually that surprising, because we know from previous elections that incumbent governments tend to get mentioned a great deal more than their opposition challengers. However, we can also see that there was a lot of discussion about One Nation particularly. Again, this links to obviously the question of what role it would play in the new parliament. But what's actually more interesting, I think, in this graph is on the other side, where we've looked at specifically the retweets of the party candidates, where we see a huge discrepancy between retweets for Labour candidates' messages, for Labour Party messages, compared to all the other parties. I think in total, Labour had something like four times the mentions of all the other parties combined. So the retweets of all the other parties combined. That's a sense. That's a sign of support. That's a sign of endorsement to some extent, and that should be encouraging, I think, for Labour certainly in this.
Now, this last graphic shows issues that have been mentioned in relation to candidates, I understand. Explain the significance of this.
Yeah, so what we see here is essentially the network of discussions that happen around the candidate accounts. And we see in the first place that Labour is very much central. Again, most of the discussion and most of the retweeting was about Labour rather than the other parties. So a lot of the discussion on Twitter was simply about Labour in its own right. We see, on the other hand, that there was a good deal less discussion about the LNP, and where there was, they were often mentioned very closely together with One Nation, to the point that our algorithm could actually not quite distinguish these mentions from each other. That was really one conversation about Labour and about the LNP and One Nation together. Also linked a little bit to an issue that was pushed quite strongly, I think, by the taxi councils around Queensland, which is Uber and other ride-sharing services. And again, this was associated, this was, I think, pushed at the LNP particularly as an issue that it might want to deal with. On the other hand, we see again a very significant discussion also around the Adani mine, and there we see this was really one of the big individual topics that really had strong discussion throughout, particularly again in the first few weeks of the campaign. And then it's an issue that's linked particularly with Labour and the Greens, so really seen as an environmental issue more than a jobs and growth issue throughout the campaign.
Axel Bruns, thanks so much for sharing your research and being with us tonight.
Thank you.
That's the latest on Twitter, and I'll be back later on with some data from Facebook.
Thanks, Louisa. Well, Labor State Secretary Evan Moorhead has been running the show for the ALP this time around, and so we'll head upstairs where Emma Griffiths will speak with him.
Evan Moorhead, I know it's very early in the evening. Are you getting any results at all, any word from any of the booths?
Look, we're still waiting on those early booths to come in, but the exit poll does look promising. I think the exit poll that we've seen so far tonight has seen those results that we've seen over the last couple of days replicated, and hopefully that's a trend that'll continue later tonight.
So that had a two-party preferred of 52-48 Labor's way. Is that enough for Labor to form government in its own right?
Look, I'm sure it is. The Premier's made it clear that the objective of this campaign was to have a principled position of getting a majority in government, and I think 52-48 is enough to pick up those key seats to make that possible.
You're sure it is?
No, you can never be sure until those votes come in, but I'd rather be on 52-48 than on 48-52.
And so which seats in particular are you watching intently as the ones that you think you may pick up?
Look, I think there's plenty of key opportunities in Mansfield, Mount Ommaney, Redlands, Toowoomba North are all, and a few others in southeast Queensland. Look, there's also key opportunities for us in regional Queensland. I think, particularly seats like Whitsunday and Burdekin have great opportunities for us to pick up new seats.
Do you wish perhaps that Anastasia Palaszczuk throughout the campaign had left a little bit more room to manoeuvre in terms of forming government with any minor party or independent in the parliament?
No, not at all. I think that our campaign has been built on giving people that really clear choice, and we know that at the end of the day, Pauline Hanson and the LNP had already signed up to a coalition arrangement.
But if it's a matter of working with an independent or a Green or a Qatar Australia Party MP again, and it comes at the expense of forming government, would you do it?
I think the Premier's made it clear that should go into opposition rather than be beholden to minor parties, and I think that's a principled position and a good choice to put to the people of Queensland.
After this election campaign and a couple of I suppose, very public outings by the Labor member for Bundamba, Joanne Miller. Is she still a very welcome member of the Labor Party? Of course. Joanne's always been a part of the team. I think that Joanne's always been a strong voice for her community and she'll continue to be so. And I suppose looking at Queensland as well, it has always been the story of the regions versus the southeast corner. To what extent do you think that is in play this election? Look, there's clearly been two clear campaigns here, and that's why you've seen Anastasia Palaszczuk spend so much time in this election in regional Queensland. Particularly, we've seen the rise of One Nation in regional Queensland, and I think the LNP on one hand have been prepared to use that rise to their benefit, and we've said that we won't. But it does bring a whole lot of volatile outcomes in regional Queensland that will, hopefully we'll see resolved later tonight. Okay, Evan Moorhead, thanks very much.
You're watching Queensland Votes from the ABC's Election Centre at Southbank in Brisbane. I'm Jessica Van Bonderen.
And I'm Matt Wordsworth. We're just going to bring you some live pictures from West End State School, where the count is underway. The ballot boxes have been poured onto the table in the middle of the basketball stadium. I was down there having a chat to the returning officer, Stephen. He's been doing this at almost every election since 1986. He says what they're going to do is they're going to sort all the informal ones out first. There'll be about 5,000 votes and then start in earnest on the count. And that should be finished about 9 to 9:30 p.m, Jess.
And speaking of the count, we're going to have a look at some seats, starting off in Nanango. Here you go, Deb Frecklington.
Thanks, Jess.
Keep an eye out for this one.
Just before, I'll just do a quick statewide figure. We're currently seeing those figures: 37 for Labor, 33 for the LNP, 21 for One Nation, Greens 10%, only a tiny number for Katters Australia and others. This is trying to correct for where the votes have come from. There's a lot of very small rural figures coming in at the moment, and we're correcting for that. And so the change in vote that's coming out of that at the moment is the LNP vote down, One Nation well up, Katters Australia down, and others down. So we haven't got, that's just very early figures, only 0.3% counted. But what we do have just starting to get a few seats with 1%. I thought the first one to bring up was Nanango with 1.6% counted. Deb Frecklington is well ahead at the moment. One Nation is finishing second at this stage. And if we have a look at the two-party preferred that we're seeing there, it's a 2.4% swing to One Nation, which would still deliver it to Deb Frecklington. So that's good news for you so far. I presume you might get your own direct source tonight. Condamine, which is to the west of Toowoomba, Pat Weir has won it at the last election. Again, we've got a situation where One Nation is second in this electorate, Katters Australia Party third and Labor fourth. I think we might be going to two-party preferred. There's a big swing there. It's rather hard. I'm not quite sure what that's measured against last time, but certainly all these early figures, but they're small towns, are recording big One Nation figures. And Lockyer, which is the one there's been a lot of interest in, we've got some more accurate sort of figures. We've got 4% counted there. The LNP on 38, James Savage on 35.5, and Labor's preferences on 21. Now, I think we're matching that electorate polling place by polling place. And what we're seeing is a small swing to the LNP because the Labor's preferences, we're estimating, will flow to the LNP, which would deliver that seat to James McDonald, who would replace Ian Rickus. But that's an early figure. We're not quite calling it yet, but that's just a sign of some of the early figures. What hasn't come in is a lot of the bigger towns. The question is whether One Nation will do as well in the bigger towns as they've done in the small communities.
Thanks, Anthony. Deb Frecklington, well, this is your seat, Nanango. Are you getting anything on the phone?
Yeah, I am getting a few figures through, Matt, and look, there are only very small booths that have been counted so far, but those figures for Condamine, Lockyer and Nanango, three very similar seats with similar competitions in them, so those figures that are the votes for LNP are looking very promising. And
you must be happy with Lockyer.
Absolutely.
Swing to the LNP.
Look,
that's something that One Nation was hoping to win.
Well, and that's why I mentioned him before, because Jim McDonald has been a really hard-working candidate. He gets the area. Ian Rickus has done a wonderful job as the member for Lockyer for all of those years, and Jim McDonald has really stepped up in this campaign. He's from the area. He's a local police officer, and his family are there. And look, he's promised some really good little things that area have been screaming out for, and I think what they are looking for is really good representation, and whilst that's only very small votes in at the moment, that is promising.
Well, seeing as they are just still very small votes, can I maybe go back to what the Social Media Hub was talking about before? Any surprise that Adani featured so heavily on, Twitter and Facebook during the campaign, Stephen Miles?
I think that analysis concurs with our sense of what happened during the campaign. The Adani issue peaked early on and was no doubt a distraction to us in that first week to 10 days. But the Premier's regional launch and her jobs announcement in Maryborough really shifted the focus off that, and that seemed to be what Axel's figures were showing.
We saw a lot of protesters early on in that first week, and then by the Friday, I think it was, we saw the Premier announcing that she would veto the loan. Was that just a coincidence, the timing of those two events?
I think the Premier was really clear about the motivations.
I think it's called flip-flopping.
The Premier needed to head off what was a very likely last-minute smear campaign from the LNP.
Come on, Steve.
No, we know that.
Away from that very
no one believes you, Matt. No one believes you. The LNP.
What about the accusation that it was purely to mollify people who might be going to vote Green in the southeast corner? What do you say to that?
What it was very effective at doing was removing that distraction that had been there early on, but also putting our position exactly in line with what our long-held position had been, that the project should stand or fall on its own 2 feet, that taxpayer funds shouldn't be used to subsidise it. And I think while there are strong views both for and against that project, even most of the people who are for it do not support the federal government's nearly $1 billion taxpayer-funded loan. You saw that at the Sky News Forum, and I think that ultimately we've ended up with the position that the majority of Queenslanders have.
I'm sure Matt Canavan wants to respond. He's been dying.
So he deserves to have a response.
The only surprise is we've gone 40 minutes and he hasn't mentioned it.
That's right. That's the longest it's been paid. Matt Canavan, what do you say to Stephen Miles?
Well, look, the hypocrisy of Labor Party's legion here. They put $1 billion into the Newcastle coal rail line when Kevin Rudd was in power. So apparently it's okay for New South Wales, but not okay for Queensland. You saw the other day up in Townsville when they were asked at the debate, do they support the Adani project and do they support government investment in jobs for North Queensland? Almost to a man, their hand went up. And if we see the Labor vote getting smashed in regional Queensland tonight, it'll be because of their failure to stand up to the Greens and back the future opportunities in regional Queensland. They've just deserted the workers, right? They used to be a party that represent the workers. They formed in Barcaldine under a tree that's now dead, and they have left all the workers in regional Queensland long behind so they can save people like Stephen on green preferences.
But it's the Liberal National Party vote that's already collapsing in the regions. It's going straight to One Nation. So if any of what Matt was saying was true, the LNP vote would be through the roof.
Well, actually, One Nation do support the project too, Anthony. The party that doesn't support this project is the Labor Party, and that's at odds with the people in North Queensland.
We are going to come back to Adani tonight, I'm sure. But tonight on the ABC, we're also running a Facebook Live where you can also be part of the ABC's election coverage. Political reporter Chris O'Brien and Rebecca Livingston from ABC Radio are hosting an election party, answering your questions about the election as the results roll in and talking with key players from all sides of politics. Louisa, let's take a look at what they're up to behind us tonight.
Well, yes, Jess, I know you're having fun up there, but I think the real party's down here. Facebook Live party. They've got everything down here and about to crash it. So Rebecca Livingston, Chris O'Brien, how's it going down here on this Facebook Live?
Well, fabulously well, Louisa. I'm pleased to say we're offering an alternative, a contrast to what's happening on TV. That includes pineapples, cabana cheese, and this, which I created just for you.
Thank you very much. It looks great, although I don't know if that's really right in Queensland to be doing that to a mango.
Well, they were $3 for $6, which I think is a bargain at the moment in terms of mangoes, and Cobby and I will certainly be consuming them later in the evening.
$2 a mango is very good value. Louisa, what we're attempting tonight is 78% nonsense and 22% real stuff. And at the moment it's about 95% to 5%, but yes, the ratio will change as the night goes on.
I believe that's where we say the swing is on, Cobby. That's what's happening right now. But Facebook Live, if you are out and about enjoying a Saturday night and you don't want to be on the couch watching the TV, then join us anytime you like on your phone, on your laptop, on your tablet device, and we'll keep you company throughout tonight. We had an official democracy sausage specialist in earlier, and
West End State School was the big winner West End State School was the star of the democracy sausages because they went above and beyond the call of duty and had halloumi, etc. But did you tell me, Rebecca, that there was somewhere they were selling sorbet today?
Yes, that was it at my local polling booth. There was sorbet.
Very la-di-da.
I know. Frankly, it's too posh. It's inappropriate. Stick to sausages in white bread, a little bit of onion, tomato sauce and mustard is acceptable. And if you're very, very odd, you can have barbecue sauce on board, but I wouldn't do it.
Well, there you go. If there's one call made tonight, it's that West End Primary School does have the best election democracy sausage. Back to you guys on the panel.
Thanks, Louisa. Now we head north to Rockhampton, where high-profile former Mayor Margaret Strelo has run as an independent. Ms Strelo, of course, was the Premier's choice to replace Minister Bill Byrne, who's retiring due to ill health, but she missed out to Barry O'Rourke because she was in the wrong faction. She quit Labor to run as an independent. Margaret Strelo, was that the right decision?
Oh, look, absolutely, it was the right decision. It probably wasn't so much about pre-selection. It was about the fact that Rockhampton just wasn't getting any attention. We're forgotten in the middle here a little bit, and as the dollars rolled out for everybody else, and then particularly decisions like the Adani decision from the Premier, I just felt that someone needed to sort of scream and yell a little on behalf of Rockhampton.
Yeah, do you think that's actually going to strip some votes away from Labor, that decision to veto the loan to the rail line for Adani?
Look, no one could really read what was going on today, so I'm not sure what's going to happen. This is a very, very strong Labor town. The margin's about 14% here, so it's hard to imagine the seat going anywhere but to Labor. But
so
people
this was just
are
a
a bit
protest
angry
by you rather than a
and
realistic shot at the title?
Oh no, I'm out to win it, but it's going to be a tough thing. I get that, but it was and it is a fair dinkum attempt at getting an independent up in Rockhampton. I've actually resigned from the Labor Party and well and truly burnt my bridges there. I think my city has been really badly treated.
All right, Margaret Strelo, well, we'll watch with interest as those figures come in.
Thank you.
And Anthony Green, as it happens, we do have now some early figures for Rockhampton.
Yes, and this is just one booth. It's from the north side of the city. 34.5 for Labor, 24 for Margaret Strelo. Douglas Rogers on 19.6 and One Nation there. Wade Rothery, a former rugby league player with the Broncos. And the change in vote there is Labor Party's down 20. And most of that, I suspect, has gone to the independent. But it's only one polling place. There's more figures to come during the night. But that's just, we're starting to get these sorts of figures, and they're a little hard to completely pick apart at this stage.
Anthony, thank you. Matt Canavan, that's your neck of the woods.
Yeah,
is that surprising you at all?
No, not at all. Labor have been ganged up a little bit here in Rockhampton. They've had an internal dispute themselves that's seen the split vote. The information I'm getting is that preferences on the counts are going against Labor, which is what pretty much every party.
Is that because of the disunity of that factional dispute, or
look? I think there's a raft of reasons there, but the Margaret Strelo there, the mayor, ran an open ticket, didn't preference Labor, so that's hurt them, and that seems to be translated in the actual preferences, is what I'm hearing. So they're in a bit of trouble. Going from 35 to 50 is going to be difficult for Labor.
Seems like it has been damaging. Stephen Miles in Rockhampton.
Well, it looks like the LNP's running third there. So while the Labor vote is down, it's likely to be decided on LNP preferences. I don't have detail about what the LNP was recommending there.
Why was that such a messy process? The Premier's authority, I mean, Margaret Strelo, that was her pick to run in that seat. Why was her authority undermined in that way?
Well, look, ultimately, we let our branch members decide who our candidates are. That's how our party works. We have a process. Both candidates at the outset agreed that they would accept the outcome. Margaret agreed that she would accept the outcome. And then having lost that ballot, she didn't accept the outcome, and that's what's happened there.
It's cost her perhaps her job. She had to resign as mayor to run, and there's not another council election till 2020.
Look, I'm sure they're all the things that she tossed up when she made that decision. The branch members have chosen a really strong candidate. He ran a really strong campaign, and I think we'll have to wait and get some more results in before we jump to any assessments about what's happened there.
But I think, Matt, if I can, the figures that we're seeing there clearly shows that the people of Rocky feel really let down by the Labor Party and the Premier. I mean, the flip-flopping on that Adani decision, she calls, or I've just heard Stephen Miles call that decision of the Premier's one way, the other way again, a distraction. And I think the issue of it is that she was putting her job and the jobs of people like Stephen Miles before the jobs of people in Rocky and Central and North Queensland. And those figures that we're seeing there today clearly show that.
Senator Chisholm, how do you answer that, the jobs for people in Rockhampton in terms of the Adani mine veto?
I think Labor's got absolutely the right policy on it, that the mine has to stack up on its own merits, but they shouldn't get a cent of taxpayers' dollars. Matt mentioned the Townsville Forum. It was full of business people. What business person isn't going to say, yeah, I'll have a cheap loan? Of course they are. So it's ridiculous for Matt to use that as evidence. The reality is that Labor had the right policy on this. We don't support taxpayer money being used to fund the Adani project, but I, for one, absolutely support the jobs. If the project stacks up and goes ahead, fantastic. But it's got to do it on its own merits.
Senator Canavan, what is the status of the loan application?
So it's being assessed at the moment by the federal government. The Labor Party supported the establishment of a Northern Australian infrastructure facility, and those applications are assessed by an independent body. That's what's happening. The Queensland Labor government actually applied for these funds. They wrote to the federal government in February last year saying, please consider the Galilee rail line for an investment from the federal government. And I know behind the scenes, the Labor government, including the Premier, were encouraging Adani to go and apply for funds to Canberra. And then 3 weeks from the election says, oh, even if you're successful, after encouraging you to apply, we'll pull our support for it. Well, I mean, people in North Queensland aren't mugs. They can see where they're trying to be taken advantage of, and hence the reaction tonight.
All right, well, let's take a look at some seats. We'll start off just north of where you are in Rockhampton and go to Morani. And in Morani, we have the ALP's Jim Pearce, who's contesting that seat. How's he going, Anthony Green?
Well, he's ahead 36, One Nation's 34, Kerry Ladder's 25 from the LNP. I'll show the change in vote here. Labor vote's down, One Nation's well down, LNP's down, One Nation well up. The other vote is generally Palmer United from the last election. Now that's translating into a two-party preferred swing of 3.7% to the LNP, and it's marginal. The Electoral Commission is counting between Labor and LNP in this electorate, and One Nation's currently finishing second. So if that may just be on early figures, we've got a preference count in 6 polling places. Who finishes third will determine who wins this. And what happens is that you get, with such low first preference votes, and this is an electorate with mining communities, with agricultural communities, and so this result will hop backwards and forwards through the night. I haven't got any way of correcting for that, unfortunately, so this is one we'll just come back to during the night. But at the moment, it looks like a big swing to the LNP, but the LNP's third, so that can't possibly be the result on the current numbers. Whether it's the numbers later on in the evening is another matter.
All right, let's check out Glasshouse.
Now we're getting more meaningful. We've got 2.4% counted. Andrew Powell's on 39%, the Labor Party on 28%. One Nation 16%, the Greens on 13%. Now we've got 3 polling places and we've estimated the two-party preferred swing on that, and it's 5.2%, which would be bad news for Andrew Powell if that continues through, but that's an estimate. We haven't got a preference count. If One Nation preferences are flowing more strongly than my estimate, then that swing will not be that large. But at the moment, that's just showing that there's enough One Nation vote out there to making this a very interesting night, and we'll be here for a long time. And some of these elections, I think the Electoral Commission may have counted the wrong way around for today, but that's interesting, so we'll see what happens with those counts.
Can we check out the home of the One Nation leader, Butterham?
This count's now progressing further, 2.9%, 32% for Brent Mickelberg, Ken McKenzie 28%. Steve Dixon's third on 22 with the Greens on 18. If those numbers continue, Steve Dixon can't win there. He has to be in first place to win that seat. He can't win from second, and he certainly won't win from third. So that's if I look at the change in vote, I think in that electorate, it's the most important. The Labor vote's up slightly, and there's been a switch from the LNP to One Nation, which is to do with Steve Dixon switching party. But on those numbers, he needs to get a higher vote than that, and it was always a risky thing for him to leave his party in a seat which is traditionally LNP, and One Nation has rarely done that well on the Sunshine Coast.
And to Maryborough?
Well, Maryborough, One Nation is currently leading on 39, Labor's on 35, and the LNP on 20. Again, this is 4% counted. These are all small polling places. And at this stage, the LNP is finishing third, and on those numbers, One Nation would go on to win that seat. We're getting a Labor LNP count in that electorate. We won't know whether that's a correct count till later in the evening. We don't know who's finishing third in that electorate. I'm just having a quick look. There seems to be in the southeast already a regular trend towards Labor in two-party preferred terms on under 1% counted. But in the rest of the state, we're seeing figures like this, which we are just going to have to wait and see what happens later in the evening because, as I said, when you're picking between three parties and they're under 30% and you need to know who's finishing third at the end of the night, it's going to be very difficult to do.
Okay, so we'll wait and see in some of those seats. And Buderim with Steve Dixon there, Deb Frecklington, I suppose him having defected from the LNP to One Nation during this term in office, that's probably a result that you'd like to see that seat fall back into the LNP ledger.
Well, I think the people of Buderim deserve good representation, and that's what they can get with Brent Mickelberg there. And I mean, those results are interesting at the beginning of the evening, and we'll be obviously watching that one very closely. So it does look like that Steve Dixon on those very early figures would be gone. So.
Yeah, political parties don't like turncoats, I guess.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, so you must take some joy in that.
Oh, well, look, I think the joy would be for the people of Buderim. They don't like the turncoat either, so I think we've got to look at that area. Anthony's very right. The Sunshine Coast haven't in the past ever favoured a One Nation candidate or member, so I think the people of Buderim feel let down by that sitting member as well.
And Stephen Miles' Glasshouse, Andrew Powell, early figures, of course, but a 5.2% swing to the ALP, that's going to put him in trouble, isn't it?
We've had Glasshouse as one of those seats which would be competitive pretty much from day one. I've been in Glasshouse with our candidate Brent there several times during the campaign. He was campaigning very strongly on land clearing and that was resonating in key parts of that electorate. Andrew Powell, as the Environment Minister under the Newman government, had to take responsibility for those land clearing figures. So I think it's early days, but we should certainly keep Glasshouse on the list of seats that could change hands.
All right then. Well, Ian Rickus is the retiring LNP member for Lockyer, a seat One Nation hopes to pick up tonight. He's with Emma Griffiths in the studio.
Ian Rickus, what are you hearing from your people around Lockyer today?
Well, look, I'm hearing that the vote is a bit all over the shop. There wasn't the angst at the polling booth today that there was at the last election when Campbell had sort of stirred the possum a little bit, but there wasn't the angst there this time. But from what I'm hearing is there's a slight swing to the LNP, I'd say, in the Lockyer electorate this time. So I think our candidate, Jim McDonald, should poke his nose in front by the end of the night.
Is that somewhat surprising? We've heard so much about Lockyer being one of the best chances for One Nation to actually pick up a seat with its candidate, Jim Savage.
Look, I think there must be some dispute in the One Nation party, and of course it's a bit known for its disputes amongst itself, because Pauline Hanson never visited the electorate for the last 2 months. So whether Jim Savage feels a bit put down by the fact that she's parachuted in Steve Dixon and Sam Cox and a few of those with political experience, and he's sort of lost his ranking from about number 1 to about number 3 or 4.
Is that speculation from you, or do you have any insight?
But look, what I can say is that Pauline Hanson never visited the electorate, you know, and I have seen her pull crowds of 1,000 people in the Lockyer without too much effort.
Now, you saw her off yourself. She was standing against you in 2 years ago. It was just 184 votes after preferences that you won by. Do you think it's going to be this tight?
No, I don't think so. Look, I think Jim McDonald should win it with, you know, by a couple of percent anyway. So that's, you know, and that's what the poll, that's what the redistribution sort of looked at. It looked like it was a couple of percent swing to the LNP. And Jim's worked very hard. He's fairly well known, local sergeant of police, that sort of thing. Jim Savage, you know, he put up a reasonable campaign. But like I say, Jim Savage and most of the One Nation candidates depend on Pauline Hanson. It's, you know, they're selling Pauline Hanson, they're not selling the local candidates.
And you didn't see her in Lockyer, so that wasn't there.
Yeah.
Now, Tim Nicholls, through this campaign, has been dogged by the question of whether he would form government with the help of One Nation. He's finally conceded in the latter part of the campaign that, yes, he would do that. How's that gone down in Lockyer?
Oh, look, I don't think it's made that much difference, and there is some differences. People understand our system fairly well. We treat our punters as ignorant, but, you know, last time 70%, no, over 60%, I tell a story, over 60% of Labor voters preference Pauline Hanson in the Lockyer electorate. Over 60%, only 30% preference me. Over 60% of Labor voters preference Pauline Hanson in the last election. That's why I was 2,000, I think, in front of Pauline in primaries, and slowly that chipped away and chipped away and chipped away. And that, so really, look, Tim and probably Anastasia have got to deal with the parliament that the Queensland public deliver.
Ian Rickers, we're seeing exit polls this evening and also polling in the latter days of the campaign as well, showing Labor's up. Two-party preferred 52 to 48. How much, if that proves true, how much of that is down to Tim Nicholls' leadership, do you think?
Oh, look, I don't think that too much of that's down to Tim Nicholls' leadership, but part of the problem, I think, here is we've got a two-party preferred on a three-party basis system, you know what I mean? If Pauline's polling 20 and 30% in some of the seats, you know, that's going to make a big difference, as well as also the compulsory preferential voting. You know, we've had it federally. You know, some of the boos in my electorate in the federal election, they polled over 40% One Nation, and admittedly that was for Pauline Hanson for the Senate and that sort of thing. You know, and even for the House of Reps, over 40%. So I don't think it's going to be that strong this time in the state election.
Okay, Ian Rickers, thanks very much.
Thank you very much for that. Okay.
Welcome back to Queensland Votes. This is the Queensland Parliament in the heart of Brisbane on George Street, where 93 MPs will take their seats once the dust has eventually settled on Queensland Votes 2017. I'm Jessica Van Vonderen.
And I'm Matt Wordsworth. Well, let's get a state of the play as it stands. We've got 5% of the vote counted, and it's a 1% swing to Labor at this stage. But for some more figures, let's go to the ABC's election analyst, Anthony Green.
Well, we'll look at the first preference votes across the state. It's currently settling down 37, 33, 15, 11. That's roughly in line what some of the polls were suggesting across the state. And if I look at the change in vote there across the state, LNP down 8.5, One Nation up 13.9. The one warning I'd put on that, there's a lot of non-southeast votes in at the moment, and that's where One Nation is polling strongest. So let's just go back to there, and then I'll look at the state, different parts of the state. In southeast Queensland, it's 39, 33, 9.5 for One Nation, which is not bad because they're only contesting half the seats. They're averaging 15% in the southeast seats they're contesting, and 14% there for the Greens. But if we look at the rest of the state, regional Queensland, Labor's 32, One Nation, LNP 32, One Nation 22, Greens 6. That's why, and that's varying dramatically from seat to seat. And we'll be coming back to some of these graphics for a long time tonight. But the next thing I'll show you is one of the seats, Lockyer, which we're following, and it explains why One Nation will have difficulty winning seats. These are the figures in Lockyer, and James Savage is currently leading 36.8, Jim McDonald 34.6 for the LNP, and Nicole Lincoln 22.5. The problem for One Nation is that Labor's finishing third and have directed preferences to the LNP. If you look at the change in vote by party that's occurring there, the One Nation vote has gone up 11% since last time on a comparison there. But the problem is the Labor preferences are flowing, and we've got a preference count in half a dozen electorates, and there's a 7.3% swing to the LNP. So this is indicating that the LNP will win that seat and Jim McDonald would be the new member. But that shows why One Nation will have difficulty. If Labor's third, the LNP will win the seat if the preferences flow. And certainly on the evidence of Lockyer is the preferences from Labor are flowing to the LNP as they were suggested to be.
Senator Chisholm, you're nodding along in agreement there.
I know from Lockyer, last election campaign, we really ran a really strong campaign and kept Pauline Hanson out of Parliament. And again, Nicole Lincoln's done a great job running to ensure that One Nation don't win a seat. So I would expect our preferences to flow strongly to the LNP. Not that Matt will be that grateful for us.
We'll take them where we can get them.
Stephen Miles, I want to talk about the Green vote because we haven't gone there yet tonight. 14% in southeast Queensland. You'd be all too well aware of what kind of damage they might be doing out in the seat of Maiwar. Scott Emerson, the LNP candidate, the sitting member there, under threat. Also in South Brisbane, the Deputy Premier Jackie Trad facing a challenge from Amy McMahon from the Greens. So how do you think the Green vote is going to affect the major parties?
They're certainly the two seats where the Green vote will likely matter most. I think in South Brisbane, I think Jackie Trad will be fine. I think in Maiwar, the real threat there is to Scott Emerson. If he loses the seat, it could be to Labor or it could be to the Greens, but certainly he's in for a difficult time. He had a tough job. He was the LNP's campaign spokesperson in an inner city seat, having to explain the LNP's support for that $1 billion loan to Adani and their deal with One Nation. That was a tough gig.
Yeah, just on Jackie Trad, we saw one poll during the campaign, 51-49 in favour of the Greens in that seat. So why are you so confident she's going to be okay tonight?
Oh, that particular poll was pretty flawed. It predicted that 2/3 of LNP voters would preference the Greens over Labor. That's pretty unlikely. If you distribute preferences from that poll on even a 50-50 basis, that put Jackie ahead 55-45. So the preference distribution was done in a certain way to create a certain headline, but I think in practice it's highly unlikely that will be the result. The LNP did their best to ensure that was the result. They weren't at polling booths today. They didn't have any signs. They were trying to make sure their vote went as poorly as they possibly could, and maybe that will have changed the result. We'll see.
Well, you actually could be the beneficiary of LNP preferences,
well,
Deb Frecklington.
Yeah, and Matt, I think it's interesting. I mean, we've got Stephen Miles here who cut and run from Maiwar. I mean, that has to be brought up. Here he is saying Maiwar may fall to the Greens, and guess what? He's the guy that may, hand it there because he's the one that decided to find a safe Labor seat when the going went tough. So I think when the going got tough. So I think Scott Emerson, having been able to sit in that seat and actually fight for the people of Maiwar, which is what the people around there want. They don't want a member there, to cut and run because he's decided to find a safer seat.
Well, Stephen Miles, how do you respond to that? Because your seat of Mount Cootha was abolished, but sort of fell in that Maiwar area, and then you've scooted north to Marumba in the northern suburbs of Brisbane. Right. So was that a cut and a run?
Look, north of Brisbane, one seat was abolished, the one I was in. A seat was created, one where I grew up. And so I took the option to run in that seat. Having said that, though, Ali King is a fantastic candidate in Maiwar. I've been on the ground with her doing a lot of door knocking, and I know that she's very competitive in that race. So, I don't think anyone should be gloating about cutting and running until we see whether Scott's kept that seat.
I'm not gloating about it, I'm just stating the obvious. I mean, the people of Maiwar have their member who decided to find a safer seat. I think it's a fair enough comment, all while Scott Emerson has stuck around and fighting for the people of Maiwar.
There are 60 other seats in the southeast corner, and just looking at those sort of early indications that Anthony gave us before, Senator Matt Canavan, the southeast, you need to win the southeast to win government, don't you?
Well, of course, it's 2/3 of the seats in Queensland are in southeast corner, so that's the political reality. I mean, the table as it looks though, of course, at the moment is it's close going into this, so across the state. So the LNP's task tonight is to retain those close seats in southeast Queensland. And to try and pick up in the regions where they clearly have the potential to do that. So that'll be the key thing. There's a few key seats there like Mansfield, Mount Omni, that we'll see. We'll see whether the LNP can retain those close seats in southeast Queensland.
Okay, thank you. Well, we're going to take a look at a few of the seats now, and starting off in the southeast corner, actually in Ipswich, where we have hopefully some graphics coming up to tell us something about
the ALP's
the seat of
Jennifer Howard there.
This is Jennifer Howard and Andrew Caswell, the LNP candidate.
And what we're seeing here is that Jennifer Howard's on 47.4 and One Nation 25.4. Malcolm Roberts, of course, the well-known Malcolm Roberts. We have, 9 of the 18 polling places to report tonight with 22% counted. So obviously there's a lot of pre-polls if that's 9 of the polling places. And you can see Jennifer Howard is well ahead. Look at the change in vote that's occurring here. The Labor vote is down slightly, but it's been a big shift from the LNP to One Nation. The LNP were very late in naming their candidates in both Ipswich, and they had a late change in Ipswich West, and that seemed to have played through. We are seeing seeing a swing of about 4.5% to One Nation on those numbers. We have one polling place preference count. That's only one polling place. But on those first preferences, the Labor vote's down 9.5, but they're not going to lose from those numbers. So that looks like Jennifer Howard will go on to hold that seat, which you would expect. It is a safe seat.
And another historically safe Labor seat, Ipswich West. Jim Madden, the sitting MP there.
Oh, they lose it in landslides. They lost it in 74, they lost it to One Nation in 98, and they lost it in 2012. So it's the one that tends to go before Ipswich. Jim Madden's well ahead there from Bradley Trussell from the LNP, Anna O'Neill, who was a late replacement candidate for the LNP, in third place. We're going to look at the change in vote here, and this is significant to look at. You can see, again, only the Labor Party vote is only down slightly. It's a switch from the LNP to One Nation in that electorate that's causing any problem for the Labor Party. But with 47% of the first preference vote, they're actually not in trouble. I'm trying to see, I've got two polling place counts there, which is producing a 7% swing to the Labor Party, which looks a little odd. I'm not quite sure where that's come from, but I do think that on those first preferences, Jim Madden can't lose. He should go on to win that seat. His first preference is only down 4%, so he won't lose on those numbers. So it looks like both of the Ipswich seats will be safe for the Labor Party.
Well, we were just talking about Jackie Trad, the Deputy Premier in South Brisbane. Let's get a reading of how things are going for her tonight.
Well, that's most interesting on this one. We've got Jackie Trad's, look at these first preferences, 36.9, 32.1. The Greens are in second place. Simon Quinn, 26.5. If we look at the change in vote that's occurring at this stage, what we're seeing is Jackie Trad's vote is down 8%. The LNP vote is down 6%, and the Greens up 9.4. It's slightly different figures here, but those are the numbers that are being produced. It's showing a 12% swing to the Greens. We've got one preference count only at this stage, and the Labor Party's ahead. There's a lot more counting to come on that. The Labor Party on those numbers is 5% ahead, and so they'd need the majority of LNP preferences, and the LNP haven't preferenced that way. So a lot more counting to come in South Brisbane, and that prediction is based on only one polling place.
Okay, to Chatsworth in southern Brisbane. This is a marginal LNP seat. Steve Minikin, the sitting MP.
Well, this one is looking slightly more significant. We've got 9.7% counted. Paul Keane, 47.8 against Steve Minikin. Steve Minikin was one of the few LNPs elected in 2012 who was defeated and who was re-elected last time. And the LNP vote is down 11%, and the Labor first preference vote is up 9%. So that's a I've got slightly different swing figures. I'm not sure where that number's coming from. But 52.2% is our current prediction for the Labor Party, which I think we're putting it nearly in the Labor camp. We're seeing a relatively consistent swing to Labor across all of the southeast at this stage. And I'd have to say that at the moment, things are looking much better for the Labor Party. They're not losing much unless they're starting to lose some seats to One Nation.
And Anthony, let's go to the beautiful Whitsundays in North Queensland. This is the LNP's most marginal seat.
And this is an example of why it's difficult to call this election. Jason Costigan's on 34%, Bronwyn Taha on 30.4%, Noel Skippon from One Nation is 19.6%. We have a preference count between the LNP and Labor in 6 of the 22 polling places. There's a change in first preference vote that's occurring in that electorate. A big switch from Palmer United to One Nation, as well as both major parties down. We are seeing a swing of 0.1%, so basically no swing at this stage. Actually, I'm seeing, I might have slightly later figures here, but Jason Costigan is currently leading on those figures.
Thanks, Anthony. Anthony Chisholm, what Anthony Green's saying there is you've got a bit of a swing on towards the Labor Party in the southeast corner. Obviously, that's got to be gratifying for you, but where is it most profound for you?
Look, I was just looking at Menominee, Mansfield and Chatsworth, so seats which we narrowly lost last time. And ahead now, obviously a lot more counting to go, but the general mood that we picked up that we would do better in the southeast corner looks like it's playing out in Menominee, Mansfield and Chatsworth, and just in particular in Mansfield and Chatsworth, Chatsworth where Paul Keane ran for the second time, a local police officer, so a fantastic candidate. And in Mansfield as well, we had a fantastic candidate there who I actually tried to get to run last time but couldn't quite convince to run. But both of those...
How did they need convincing this time? What was said to them?
Well, Evan's obviously better at twisting arms than I am, but both of those seats in the southeast corner, or those 3 seats, are looking like you'd prefer to be the Labor Party than the LNP at the moment.
Deb Frecklington, Mansfield, that's Ian Walker's seat, Shadow Attorney General. Was he nervous heading into today?
Well, look, Mansfield, like Menominee, are one of the 2 seats that have been heavily targeted by the Labor Party, and obviously the redistribution wasn't kind either to Ian Walker, which is very disappointing. I mean, he's a wonderful colleague and friend, but also it'll be interesting to see those results. Sorry, Jess, I didn't see his results come up there, but I just know that the redistribution has really made it that more marginally Labor, and so it'll be interesting to see how that lands tonight, and of course so with the preference flows. But you know, he's been a hard-working local member, so it will be good to see him retain it if he can.
And you were already worried about Whitsunday, Jason Costigan, and looks like Chatsworth also under pressure, so there could be quite a few you might lose in the southeast corner and in Sunday.
Well, Whitsunday, the figures looked a little bit more positive for Jason Costigan up there from those early counts. But obviously Chatsworth, yeah, that is quite a surprise. Steve Minikin, a very hard-working local member as well. And
it's been a seesawing electorate, hasn't it?
Look, it really has. And it is one of those seats that he's been in since 2012. He's within the shadow cabinet and, like I say, a hard-working local member. So we'll wait and see, again, what happens with those preference flows in relation to Steve.
Stephen Miles, are you taking any heart from what you've just seen?
Certainly they're strong results for Labor across the southeast, as we've been expecting. I think the story in the southeast is that the LNP primary vote is down. It's also down across the region. So let's not forget here that while there are some bad results for Labor, we're seeing really horrible primary vote results for the LNP right across, in some cases, 10, 20% swings against them. And in those places where the ALP is running third, then our principled decision to preference the LNP will elect LNP members, and we're seeing some seats where that appears to be likely. Where the LNP runs third and are preferencing One Nation, well, they're going to elect One Nation members of Parliament. That's what we said would happen.
Matt Canavan, obviously Anthony Chisholm there saying that there's a bit of a swing on in the southeast. Is that what you're seeing from your people?
These are still very early results, of course, but there is that happening. It's a bit all over the place, though, in a seat like Toohey at the moment. The 16% count is very, very close. That wasn't probably on people's radar. But a preference counts there initially seemed that very close. So look, it is a little all over the place at this stage, and we probably need a bit more of a count to really know what's happening in southeast Queensland.
Not ready to call it really horrible.
No, definitely not.
Just in regional Queensland, it's hard to find a seat where the LNP primary vote isn't down at least 10 points. And that's now emerging.
Exaggeration.
That's now emerging as the same in the southeast corner as well.
10 points.
You've basically everywhere you look, the LNP primary is almost down 10 points. Some places it's double that.
Matt Canavan.
Well, look, I mean,
down 10 points.
The facts are the Labor Party vote is down across Queensland as well. Now, they may end up benefiting from the fact that there has been a resurgent One Nation party, but the reality is this is at this stage, ringing endorsement of a first-term government.
All right, well, let's not just talk about One Nation. There is another minor party in the race here. Let's take a look at some of the seats for Katter's Australia Party that they are targeting. Traeger, Anthony Green.
This is the old Mount Isa, which is Rob Katter's seat, and it's extended east to include Charters Towers now. And I don't think anyone's expecting that Rob Katter will be any difficulty here. He's currently well ahead. I'm not sure if 61% of the vote. There's a lot happening at the moment. I'm trying to dive into computer things and look at things, so I got a bit distracted there for a moment. But in fact, the LNP slipped to fourth at the moment. That could depend on where the result is from at the moment. But certainly, Bob Katter is in no difficulty in Traeger. If you look at the change in vote that's occurring there, we're seeing the LNP down 20, Bob Katter's part, the Katter Party up 13%, which is the sort of result you would expect. And I think that Bob Katter, I keep calling him Bob. Rob Katter will go on to win that seat without much difficulty.
All right, we might have to update that photo as well, but let's move on to Hill.
think we just lost our graphics, unfortunately.
Okay.
I think what I'll say about the electorate of Hill is that Shane Knuth's on 41% of the vote, and his vote seems to be up. He's done quite well in the parts of the electorate along the coast. So if he does well on the coast, then he'll go on to win that seat, because he already does well up on the tablelands. But the other seat I was trying to look at there is Hinchinbrook, and there's some very strange figures, which I was just trying to figure out. Where currently in Hinchinbrook, the LNP is leading on 30% of the vote from Kansas Australia 21, One Nation 21, and Labor 19.
So what's that telling you?
Well, we'll be here a long time trying to figure out what's going on in Hinchinbrook, would be my view. But that's what we're seeing in a number of these rural seats in North Queensland, is a widely diverse results with the votes split all over the place. We really have to wait for pre-polls and larger polling places to come in later in the evening.
Matt Canavan, Hinchinbrook is the seat of Andrew Cripps, was an LNP minister in the Newman government. Looks like he's under pressure, but perhaps you were assuming that might have been the case.
Well, this was always a seat where there was going to be probably a three or, by the look of it, four-way race here. And as Anthony says, when you get four parties in the almost 20s, I think, by those figures, you can end up a long way along into the night working out who's going to finish in the top two and who's going to distribute preferences. But you know, we're probably not going to know that seat tonight by the look of that.
Katter's Australian Party did only run in 10 seats at this election. Are they going to be much in play elsewhere around the state, do you think, other than, you know, the...
Look, their votes always been relatively concentrated, except for a bit of an anomaly at the 2012 election in some areas. So I expect the money to be strong in those areas. And they've certainly got a good chance of keeping their two seats or their two members of parliament, and they're in play there in Hinchinbrook, definitely.
While we're in regional Queensland and talking about regional Queensland seats, how has a city leader in Tim Nicholls resonated in regional Queensland?
Well, look, I mean, I think the things that people care about at the moment in regional Queensland is policy, because we've basically been in North Queensland in a recessionary-like conditions for the last 2 years. So people are desperate for somebody who's going to bring something, fight for something, do something. And Tim's had good policies on that front, but there's a lot of disillusion out there in the electorate with politics, with major parties, and that's feeding minor party vote at this election, as it has in the last couple in Queensland.
Okay. All right. Well, let's take another look at the social media environment tonight, and Louisa Rebgetz is standing by.
Thanks, Matt. Well, we know that the major parties really focus on social media to try and get their message out there, and it's used more and more with people now connecting with social media so much and getting their news and information from social media. So we're looking at some of the numbers we can get from Facebook as to the interactions that political parties have on social media, which is their likes and comments. So when people like or comment on a post by Pauline Hanson's Please Explain page or the One Nation political party, you can see here that the average interactions for all the parties is about 42,000 and the average posts per day is about 3. But for Pauline Hanson, she's getting far above average in terms of interactions, in terms of those likes and comments, when she's only posting on average 1.8 posts a day. We can see now with Anastasia Palaszczuk and the Queensland Labor Party, once again, just below average in terms of the interactions and posting about average as well, but the political party's getting a bit more than her as a personal figure. Tim Nicholls, however, is a bit lower, 11,500 likes and interactions when he posts on social media, on Facebook, and about on average in terms of the posts per day. The political party, about just below average, and similar situation in terms of the posts per day. So what we can see through this data is that it doesn't necessarily matter how many posts you are putting on Facebook. It doesn't necessarily correlate in terms of interactions. Surprise down here is that Queensland Greens Party, 43,000 likes and comments on their posts, but they are posting a lot more than average. So some quite interesting information that we can get out of this data coming from social media. Let's take a little look at what's been posting online today. And of course, we discussed this a little earlier with the Facebook Live deciding that the West End State School has the best democracy sausage in Queensland. So congratulations to West End State School. Someone's got creative here with their democracy sausage earrings. So taking that a little further than you would expect. And of course, dogs. Dogs go viral on social media, so they've put 2 and 2 together, the democracy sausage and the dog, so you can't get a better combination than that, really. We'll have some more information and some more posts that have been being posted tonight, later on tonight.
Thanks very much, Louisa. And in a moment, we're going to speak with Robbie Katter in the seat of Traeger. He's standing by to speak to us. You are watching Queensland Votes across the country on ABC News Channel and also on ABC Radio across Queensland. So let's take a look at the figures in Traeger. Anthony?
Well, I'm not sure I can show them just at the moment, but I can say this, that Robbie Katter's got 62% of the first preference vote. There's no difficulty whatsoever in being re-elected.
Well, hopefully Robbie Katter just heard that just now. He's taking a swig of some sort of beverage. Mr. Katter, thanks for joining us tonight. The Katter dynasty lives on.
Oh, that is... Oh, yeah, that would be so good.
I don't think Mr. Katter can hear us at the moment. Have we lost you, Mr. Katter?
I work with too, like he would be.
Well, he's looking pretty relaxed there anyhow. All right, we'll try and come back to Robbie Katter a bit later on.
All right, well, let's just get a state of play check, because you can see in the bottom of your screen there that the ABC election computer has got the ALP on 41 seats already. We've got 20% of the vote counted, and there's a 2% swing on for Labor. Anthony, what are the latest figures?
Let's look at the first preference votes we're seeing at the moment. Labor's on 36, the LNP on 33, One Nation 14, the Greens on 11.1, Katter's Australia Party 2, and others are 4%. And those numbers are based on, from different parts of the state. We've got 20% counted in the southeast and 24 in regional Queensland. The change in vote that's gone on since the last election is 1.4 down for Labor, 8.6 for the LNP, One Nation up 13, and the Greens up 2.6. So there's, with a Labor loss and Green increase and the leakage of One Nation preferences, it's translating into, I think it's a swing of about 1.5% to the LNP, to Labor, I'm sorry. Now let's look at the chamber. We're giving away the seats. I'm going to give away the seats we're pretty sure and pretty confident about have been won. And at this stage, we're getting Labor up to 41 and the LNP is on 30 with One Nation 1 and Katter's Australia 3. I think we've currently got them ahead in Hinchinbrook, which is a calculation I'm not exactly precisely confident about. And if we add a few more seats which are leaning that way, we're getting Labor still on 41 and the LNP's on 30. Certainly Labor is holding in its own seats. There are a few regional seats like Bundaberg and Maryborough where it's in trouble, and the figures are very preliminary in Thuringowa and Mundingburra, and they're like neighbouring Hinchinbrook. The first preference vote is divided all over the place. But at this stage, there's definitely a small swing to Labor, which looks like it's picking up some seats in Brisbane, and it's rather hard to see how the LNP can end up with more seats than Labor on these figures.
Thank you, Anthony. All right, Robbie Katter is back with us. Mr. Katter, thanks for your time tonight. How are you feeling?
That's okay. Yeah, I'm feeling great on my own account at the moment. It's been a really great result for me here.
And not entirely unexpected, given the size of the margin.
Yeah, but obviously, you know, our intent is to grow as a party. We've got 2 seats. We had 3 seats in the last parliament, 2 in this one, and we believe we can get anywhere from 3 to 5 in this one, and that should buy us a bit of influence, I'd expect. And we're looking to take some control back of for rural and regional Queensland, that area of the political spectrum, because we feel that space has been vacated, and notably the 2 political parties, 2 major parties, Labor didn't venture out west at all in this campaign, and the LNP went out west once. So, you know, we felt a bit forgotten, and I feel that sort of is how it's been for a long time, and we're looking to take up that space. And I think, given the results I've got here so far in Mount Isa, I think it really demonstrates that dissatisfaction with the representation that people have had in rural and regional areas from the majors.
How are things looking for your colleague Shane Canute in Hill?
I probably won't even bother checking the results for Shane tonight, because I can assure you he'll be the member for Hill come tomorrow. I've been saying to many people, Shane Canute could run for the seat of... Yeah, but Shane Canute could run for the seat of Botswana and win it in a canter. He knows how to win elections, and he's always battled adversity. So honestly, I don't worry about Shane. He'll win that seat.
Labor during the campaign was urging everybody, was saying that it was not going to form minority government with anybody, not One Nation, not the Katter Party.
Yeah.
How did you feel about that when the Premier said that? Because you did work quite closely with the Labor side of politics at different times throughout the term.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, we've worked closely with Liberals and Labor in the last term. Don't forget, Liberals got 4 private members' bills through in that last Parliament. We got 2. So we've worked well with everyone, and Labor got through the majority of their agenda in the last Parliament. So we demonstrated we can be a constructive influence, but yet someone that can hold these majors to account in the Parliament. And I think that seems to be standing us in good stead in this election, because the Parliament desperately needs competition, and people want to see people working hard for their votes and not just expecting to get them. And the major parties, and particularly in rural and regional areas, have done that for far too long. They just rely on their brand and don't think they have to fight for it. We understand fighting for votes, because we've got to fight for every single one to get them off the juggernaut of the duopoly, and we don't have the campaign budgets or anything, so we've got to do a lot of walking the streets and shaking hands, and I think people of rural and regional Queensland appreciate that sort of behaviour, and I think that's what qualifies us to sort of represent these areas.
If you do wind up with the influence in the Parliament that you're talking about and hoping for, what's the #1 priority?
I think you'd have to say, if you're talking about all of Queensland, it's energy pricing, and tell the government to get their greedy hands off that profiteering and put that money in the back pockets of homeowners and businesses. They'll do a lot better with that money that we're deriving from these energy assets, that regulated asset pricing model, addressing that, and stop spending it on infrastructure of convenience and start spending it on industry enabling infrastructure, and let it back go through the economy, because they'll put better use to that, and Queensland desperately needs that, and we want to be the people that can actually make that happen, because both majors have had a crack at it and they're addicted to that revenue that they derive from those energy assets.
All right, Robbie Katter in the vast northern outback seat of Traeger, thank you for your time tonight.
Thanks, it's been a hot day.
All right, back with us now at the ABC Election Centre. Deb Frecklington, Robbie Katter said he could win 3 to 5 seats. Obviously, he's counting Hill and Traeger. Do you think that's likely, another 1 or 2?
Look, I wouldn't give up on Mario Cogliata in Hill yet. He's a street fighter as well. So, and I think Shane Canute has a lot of new area. And of course, Tully has come into that seat of Hill. It's a vastly different seat. Shane Canute has lost his hometown of Charters Towers as well. So look, whilst Robbie Katter's feeling very buoyant about his seat, and of course at 65 or whatever % primary that was, he should. But I'd like to see some more of the booths come in for Hill, because I think those are the 2 seats. And look, I certainly wouldn't give up on Andrew Cripps at this stage. One
of his key statements there was that the LNP ignored the West, only went out west once. You spent a bit of time with Tim Nicholls on the campaign trail. Do you dispute that? Yeah, look, I absolutely do. And when I wasn't on the campaign trail with Tim Nicholls, I was out there myself. And look, we really put so many amazing policies together that really would be wonderful for rural and regional Queensland. And we had a dams package, $1.3 billion worth of dams package, roads package, bridge package, regional infrastructure spending, and money being spent out where it is actually needed on doing up some beef roads and bridges. So I think Robbie Katter might like to think he has the hold on all of the regions, but we've got wonderful candidates down in Southern Downs, of course, with James Lister, who's looking to replace Lawrence Springborg. We've got Anne Lay out in Warrego, and of course Lockie Miller in Gregory. I mean, there is wonderful LNP members of Parliament and candidates, and we were out there fighting the good fight for the people of the bush as well. Stephen Miles, Robbie Katter mentioned energy pricing as one of the big issues. Well, I guess not just in Western Queensland, but for everyone in this state. That's sort of in your area in terms of renewables and whatnot as Environment Minister. What can you do about that, should you get over the line?
Renewables rests with the Energy Minister, Jess, but obviously I take an interest as the Minister with responsibility for climate change. Look, in the long run, there is no doubt that renewables is the cheapest new form of power and will increasingly be the cheapest form of power. The LNP's proposal to build a new coal-fired generator relied on keeping energy prices high for 47 years, and that's not really a solution people are going to go for. So yes, energy prices are putting a real squeeze on people's household budgets, and you see that coming through consistently in door knocking and polling and everything we do. But we were able to constrain power price rises because we continue to own our electricity assets.
All right, well, I just want to take us up to Bundaberg, because this is obviously another seat that everyone's really keen on seeing what the result is going to be, and the Labor candidate up there, Leanne Donaldson, is standing by for us to have a chat to. But first, let's have a look at the latest results, because Anthony Green is standing by to see how the sitting member Leanne Donaldson was going up against the LNP candidate David Batt and some others.
Well, it's this graph which is more interesting. Leanne Donaldson is ahead, and the LNP is running second. And Dr. Jane Truscott, the One Nation candidate, is third, and that's with nearly a quarter of the vote counted. And we've got a preference count in 4 polling places. But look at the change in vote that's occurring here. Labor votes down slightly, the LNP down 8.4, and One Nation up 22.1. Labor won that last time because they had an extraordinarily good flow of preferences from Palmer United. It was quite unexpected. That is not being repeated this time on One Nation preferences. So at this stage, there's a 2.8% swing to the LNP. And at this stage, we're predicting David Batt will win the seat. But that's because the preference flows have changed and the major party votes are both down at this election.
All right, let's go to Leanne Donaldson. Ms Donaldson, do you accept that the analysis is that this seat will be lost to the LNP?
Oh, look, I still think it's way too early to tell. You know, we've just getting a lot of the primary votes in on a lot of the booths. We haven't seen how the preference flows will turn out across all of the booths. Some of the smaller booths have come in, but the larger ones, we're still waiting for those preferences.
One Nation's effect, they've polled quite strongly, 22%, according to those figures from Anthony Green. Was that what you were expecting, and how many of those preferences are you hoping for?
Oh, look, we were expecting that One Nation, there would be quite a presence here in Bundaberg. So, you know, so that isn't unexpected for us. You know, and I guess, you know, we need to really have a look, but, you know, we didn't really have anything previously that we could go on with One Nation preferences, but, you know, trying to look at some of the other parties like Palmer and in the federal election, that, you know, those splits will be quite interesting as they come in.
Obviously, there was some controversy surrounding your situation, unpaid rates, Rego. How much of an impact did that have on your vote?
Oh, look, it's not something, I think the die-hard people that were never going to vote for me are the ones that keep raising it. But, you know, people that I've come across as I've been out across town, you know, out talking to people, it's not something. They're more worried about their cost of living, about the things that we can do for them. So, and that's what I've been focused on.
So what happens tonight? Do you think this is going to be decided, you know, in the next sort of hour or so, or is this going to go into the night because we've got this three-way contest?
Well, it'll be hard to tell, but, you know, I think you never take anything for granted. I think I don't think it'll be decided in the next hour or so. You know, the last election, it took a couple of weeks for this seat to be decided. I'm really hoping it's not that long again. I would like to get a good night's sleep, but, you know, I think we'll know in the next few days, but I don't think we'll know in the next hour.
All right, Leanne Donaldson, thank you for your time.
We're going to travel a little further south from Bundaberg now, down to the Sunshine Coast and the seat of Noosa, currently held by the LNP's Glenn Elms since 2006, Anthony.
Yes, and this is going to be a boil-over. Sandra Bolton is an independent. We've got 5% counted. She's on 32% of the vote. Glenn Elms is on 20. The Greens 18, Labor 18, One Nation 13. Labor, Greens and the other independents have directed preferences to Sandra Bolton. If there's anything like that flow of preferences, if you look at the change in vote here, it's quite a dramatic drop in the LNP vote to the independent there. So Noosa will be a lot more counting to come. And I know last time there were 10,000 votes at the pre-poll voting centre. and they may not even get counted tonight if there's that many numbers again. But on these numbers, that's showing a Labor win. That's because we've got a strange preference count. But that is in doubt, and I would think that that independent on 32% would have a very strong chance of winning that seat, and that would be a loss for the LNP.
Let's go back to South Brisbane now. Jackie Trad, the Deputy Premier, her seat. How are things shaping up for her against the Greens?
Well, we've now got a bigger vote, 37% of the vote counted. Again, her vote is below 40%. She's on 37, the Greens are on 35, and the LNP is on 22. We've got a preference count from 5 polling places, and I'll look at the change in vote first, both Labor and the LNP down, the Greens up. And the swing we're getting on the preferences is 13%, which puts it into doubt for the Labor Party. So it's still 50.4 with the Labor Party ahead. So there's a lot more counting to come. And I know one of the issues, there's actually a number of changes to the polling places. They've used 2 all-district centres just around the Wollongabba, I presume, because the cricket's on or something rather than collecting votes. So there isn't a Kangaroo Point booth and there isn't an East Brisbane booth. They've been moved at this election. So those sorts of changes would make me think there'll be a long time, there'll be a lot of counting to come there, and it may come down to how well the pre-polls and the postals have been organised.
OK, so to Brisbane's western suburbs now, to Maiwar. Scott Emerson, the sitting LNP member.
And Scott's in a bit of trouble here. He's on 39.9. The Greens and the Labor Party, 29, 28.6. They've been going backwards and forwards as to who's finishing second there. Whoever finishes second, the preference flow between Labor and the Greens is going to be about 80%. We have a preference count in 5 polling places, and it's indicating a swing of 7%. Now, we've got a Labor LNP preference count. Currently, the Greens are in second place. I think that could be interchangeable with the Green Broke, but on those numbers, Scott Emerson is in some difficulty. It does include Barden and Paddington, which are 2 external polling places where I didn't have history. But that's a preference count for Barden West, Indooroopilly West and Toowong West. So that's a very disturbing first figure for Scott Emerson.
Thanks,
a
Anthony.
Good figure for the Greens and Labor Party to be balanced, yes.
Matt Canavan, you've got a couple of big worries there, not just Scott Emerson, but also Glen Elms in Noosa. Yeah, well, look, I think this is always going to be a night where there's potential for boilovers, as Anthony said. There's a strong, in Noosa, a councillor running with a strong local profile, obviously having an impact there. And as we've said earlier, there is a challenge for the LNP in South East Queensland, and that's certainly struggling there. But it's also the ALP's at 42, according to Anthony at the moment. There's a lot of close seats left, and as Anthony said, and some of those seats we're going to be here for a while, so it's not clear whether we'll get there tonight for the ALP. Anthony Chisholm, everyone was looking at South Brisbane, but perhaps we should have been spending more time looking at Maiwar, because that's awfully close. Yeah, and I obviously think that if the Greens had put as much focus into Maiwar to try and defeat a Liberal, how much better off that we'd be. But instead they put so much focus in on trying to defeat Jackie Trad, who obviously is a really strong environmentalist and a strong progressive candidate as well. So it really does irk me the Greens put so much focus on defeating Jackie when they could have knocked off an LNP treasurer. I think that Emerson is in big trouble. I think he'd probably need a primary vote well into the 40s. He's obviously a long way off that now, but 39.9 on the latest count. And looking at the southeast corner, Labor probably had 2 concerns going into it in terms of defensives. One was Logan, which was a threat by One Nation, which is looking good. So we're really confident that Linus Powell will be returned there. Palmerstone was another one. Obviously, we had issues there with a new candidate. So it's still a bit too early to call, but we've got a strong primary vote lead in Palmerstone. And then looking around the other southeast corner seats, we've mentioned Mount Ommaney, Mansfield, Chatsworth, Redlands and Glasshouse, which you'd prefer to be us than the LNP. We haven't got anything on Redlands. But what do you tell us in Redlands? Well, we've got a lead on primary and we've got preferences coming to us. So it's one that we'd be optimistic about. And there's another one we haven't talked about yet, is Aspley as well. So similar demographics, a One Nation candidate running there. So obviously one that, similar to Mansfield, etc., that we think we're in with a chance on. So some optimism from the Labor side, whereas you look for the LNP and it's just trouble everywhere you look, whether it's in the southeast corner or whether it's in regional Queensland or Western Queensland.
Deb Frecklington, do you agree with that? Trouble everywhere you look?
Oh, look, no, not necessarily. I think it's way too early to know what's going to happen in many of those seats. Anthony just said Western Queensland. I'm not sure if he understands where that is, Anthony, given that I'm not sure what seat you're talking about. There's one seat gone to Qatar that I've seen out there at this stage. So look, we need to see how this night plays out. We know there's huge pre-poll votes in regional Queensland. There's massive pre-poll votes in the city as well.
But it looks really bad for your shadow cabinet. You've got Ian Walker, you've got Andrew Powell, and now you've got Scott Emerson.
Well, I haven't heard any of those seats being called yet, Matt. So
they're looking bad, aren't they?
Well, no, not necessarily. I think we need to look at the booths as they come in. We've seen, particularly in areas like Mansfield, I mean, they're very small booths. Those figures that we looked at before were very small booths. And we know that there are many postal votes to come in those, even in those city seats as well. So, we need to... It's very much up in the air, and we're seeing the swings happening down on, on the screen. At some stage they've been called, then they're coming back, because so obviously there are major variances amongst booths as well.
OK, well, let's head out to Ipswich, the seat of Ipswich, where Malcolm Roberts is having a tilt for One Nation. He's standing by, ready to have a chat to us. But before we get to Mr Roberts, let's take a look at the state of Ipswich at the moment, where he's up against the sitting MP Jennifer Howard, Anthony.
And what we're seeing is that Jennifer Howard's first preference vote has held up. So it's down, but it's still holding up with 43% counted. 46.8 for Labor. They don't get run down from that position when you've got 9% with the Greens, 13% for the LNP. So that's down to 46.8. If we look at the change in votes that occurred there, the Labor vote is down 5%, the LNP is down 15%, and One Nation is polling 27%. If we show the prediction that we're seeing there, we see that we're saying that the two-party preferred swing, there is a 6.5% to win swing to One Nation with that change in preferences and the loss of first preference vote. And we're predicting that Jennifer Howard will retain Ipswich at this election.
All right, thanks, Anthony. Malcolm Roberts, to you, how do you feel on those figures? Are you giving it up yet?
Well, I feel actually encouraged. It's disappointing, of course, that we're not going to win, but I feel very encouraged by especially the support that people of Ipswich have given me on the streets, and especially at the polling booth today. And we've also had a big swing for us. We've eaten into the Labor vote, and we've eaten into the Liberal Party vote. We hit a raw nerve there, because this seat has been neglected and taken for granted for many, many years. And we're up against the machine today, the machine in City Hall here, the machine in the unions, and we've fallen short. So congratulations to the Labor Party. But thank you very much to our candidates. Thank you very much to all the candidates across the state. Thank you very much to our supporters here, and especially to Michael Pucci and Sean Black, and also Gary Duffy here in this city. Gary has been a fantastic campaigner for Mayor, and he swung in behind us, and he has been marvellous. So thank you very much to all our supporters, and we'll live to fight again another day.
Well, you've had a really tough month, obviously disqualified from the Senate by the High Court. Now you've fallen short at the state level. Has it dented your enthusiasm for public office? Are we going to see you again?
No, after listening to the people in terms of it hasn't dented my enthusiasm one little bit. It's encouraged me enormously, because the people here in Ipswich know that they need people like us to speak up and to take action, and that's what we've been doing. We have already got more commitments from Anastasia Palaszczuk in 4 weeks that I've been here than they've had in the previous 3 years. They've neglected this party, and we've put Ipswich on the map in the Labor Party. They're not going to take this seat for granted again, and if we stand here, they're going to get another hell of a fight, because these people know that this party has won one office again based on lies from Anastasia Palaszczuk and based on deceit. There is nothing that they are doing for the people of Ipswich.
And what about you personally? Are you thinking you want to have another tilt at the Senate, or is the state level for you? Council, maybe?
Well, another tilt at the Senate would be very much on my mind. We've had massive support from around the state, especially after my leadership of the chairmanship of the Senate Select Inquiry into rural lending and lending to primary production customers, primary production producers, and also the general feedback we've got from the people at Ipswich, which has been a very strong Labor seat, for my work in the Senate. People have commented very, very strongly and with a lot of appreciation. So I know my work is valued. And we've got a few surprises coming up that will be a legacy from my work in the Senate, and they'll bear fruit in the next couple of months, very much so.
Just on the One Nation vote more broadly, Steve Dixon looks like he's going to lose his seat in Butterham. So, you know, do you still think that One Nation can win some seats tonight? How many are you hoping for?
Look, I make my decisions based on facts. I haven't seen the facts, and I'm not familiar with those counts, so I'm not going to make any projections whatsoever. I do know that there is a groundswell there, that people are tired of the tired old parties. They're wanting some fresh faces. They're wanting some people who can listen, especially listen and speak up and take action, and that's what we do. I think Anastasia Palaszczuk's lies about the preference deals between Liberal and One Nation have really hurt, but the key message is starting to get through. The voters control their preferences, not the parties, not the backroom deals from the two tired old parties, Labor and the LNP. Voters control their preferences. We didn't get that message through well enough, despite Pauline saying it, Steve Dixon saying it, me saying it, and others saying it. People are still under the delusion that the backroom party brokers allocate preferences. They do not. People who vote, they're the ones allocating preferences. Take note of that, everyone in Queensland, please, for the future.
OK, Malcolm Roberts, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
And we've got the State Development Minister, Anthony Lynham, standing by to speak with Emma Griffiths.
Anthony Lynham, you're the member for Stafford. It's looking pretty good there for you. What about the rest of the state? Do you think Labor is back in its own right?
I think Labor's doing very strongly tonight, Emma, very strongly indeed. Too early to call, obviously, but we're picking up seats not only in the southeast corner, we're also picking up holding some pretty significant regional seats, like Nickland, maybe, heading towards Labor. But Jim Pearce is doing very well in Morani, and Brittany Lager's doing well in Keppel, and it looks like we retain Maryborough as well. So not only is the focus in southeast Queensland for Labor, but also regionally we're doing very well.
What does that say then when we're hearing throughout the night that this is really a tale of two elections? There's an election in regional Queensland, there's an election in southeast Queensland, where Labor has almost had to fight two different battles.
Oh, absolutely, and I've perceived that as well. There's like a battle in North Queensland versus a battle within southern Queensland. But I think tonight, I'm surprised that regionally we are doing quite well. And even in some of the seats, such as Mundingborough, it looks like Labor's still in it with a chance with Coralie O'Rourke up there. So we're doing quite well significantly across the state.
And how much do you put that down to Labor policies or debate around the Adani Carmichael mine?
Well, Labor policies have been very strong and been quite clear, except the LNP and other parties were trying to portray us as giving money to the project. Even in my own electorate, there was a post out that we were giving $1 billion loan to Adani, which was factually incorrect. And the Premier making that very strong statement that no money would be going through NAIF to Adani really cleared the air.
And so that promise to veto any federal loan from the Northern Australia Infrastructure Fund, do you think that won support for Labor?
Oh, it took any doubt out of the issue completely. We are not supporting a $1 billion loan to Adani. The LNP were. Now, even strong supporters for that Adani coal mine, they didn't want that $1 billion loan to go to Adani. So that cleared the air for us, and that made it quite easy for us regarding that issue.
You did cut a deal with the Indian company, though, to defer royalties for the first 5 years. So that does give them a financial break, doesn't it?
Oh, that resource royalties framework is for any company in our specific provinces, in the resource areas, in the Northwest Minerals Province, in the Surat, in the Bowen Basin, in the Galilee Basin. Any company can access that.
And are any company currently accessing it?
It's no special deal for Adani. Any company can access it. We have some big players in the Northwest Minerals Province. Hopefully we'll get off the ground in our new term.
In your new term, so you're looking pretty happy there.
I'm looking pretty happy at the moment, but obviously it's very early days.
OK, so in a new term, would a Labor state government pay for road infrastructure out to the Adani Carmichael mine?
Well, we assist local councils with their roads all the time.
That sounds like a yes.
I was up there with Isaac Regional Council, with the Mayor up there, and we announced $26 million to assist in the construction of an abattoir with the road project to assist the council. So that's normal course of events that
the
we
abattoir's
work
not as controversial as the Adani Carmichael mine, though.
But there are other resource projects that we also assist councils with their roads as well, and we will discuss that with Anne Baker as it comes up.
Okay. Now, you're relatively new to politics, in a sense, from voters. You've had a big life outside the Labor Party, Anthony Lynham. So do you see why support for Adani flies in the face of rhetoric from Labor about climate change and renewable energy?
Well, with Adani, with climate change, Queensland has a 50% renewable energy policy by 2030, and will achieve that goal. We have some fantastic projects that people probably don't even know about. We have one project, the Kidston project, a pumped hydro storage project, which is 24 hours a day solar power by storing that water and pumping it down as hydro during the night. And that provides 1/3 of the power of a coal-fired power station. We just need a few of those and we'll have 24-hour solar power providing baseload through our state. And this is a wonderful initiative of the Palaszczuk Labor government.
Anthony Lynham, thanks very much for your time.
Thanks, Emma.
Well, night has descended on the Gold Coast, glitter strip of Queensland, battleground for Queensland votes. 2 new seats up for grabs there, 11 in total. You're watching the ABC's election night coverage at the ABC Election Centre. I'm Matt Wordsworth.
And I'm Jessica Van Vonderen. Well, it's almost 10 to 8 here in Queensland and we've got 40% of the vote counted. And at the moment we're saying there's a 1% swing towards Labor. Anthony Green, talk us through it.
Well, let's look at that first preference vote. 36, 33, 13, 10.8 for the Greens, 2.1 for Katter's Australia Party, 5% with others. The change in vote that's occurring is Labor's down slightly, the LNP's down substantially. A lot of that lost to One Nation. If we look at the change in vote in the different parts of the state, in southeast Queensland, the Labor vote's barely budged, the LNP's down, One Nation's up 8.7, that's a slightly false figure there. But if we look at regional areas, in regional Queensland, Labor's down 4%, the LNP down 9%, One Nation up 19%, and look at the primary votes in regional Queensland, 30, 31, 21, 6, 6. That's why, and that's varying from seat to seat. We're having to sort of do a lot of jiggery-pokery with a few figures here because trying to work out what order candidates are finishing. But it's quite remarkable figures at the moment outside of the southeast. In the southeast, if I look at what do I want to look at now? I'll look at the chamber. We're starting to fill in seats. We're about to do some Townsville seats and Labor's not looking nearly as good in the north of the state. But we're definitely giving Labor, at this stage, 42 seats and the LNP 37 and Katter's Australia Party 2. We're leaning a few more towards 44, 38. Steve Dixon has definitely lost Butterham. He cannot win that seat. And we're starting to see a few other seats in the southeast falling towards the Labor Party. But we're seeing some really interesting results in North Queensland.
Thanks, Anthony.
It'll be a while before we call this election. It's not clear.
All right, thanks, Anthony. A while before we call this election. Matt Canavan, Anthony's also saying we're seeing some quite remarkable figures. What are you seeing in your look around the regions?
That last comment from Anthony is what I say here. It is bouncing around a lot, but it's just difficult to see how the ALP goes from 43 to 47. There's a lot of close seats, though. They may pull it off, in Townsville, the ALP votes in the 30s and in the seats they're running at, and that will be difficult to get to 50 on the preference flows. In Rockhampton, which I don't think Anthony has got yet in the seats in doubt, I find it very difficult to see how the ALP will hold Rockhampton. Their primary's at about 31%. That might be in the ALP column there at the moment, Anthony. So it's you know this is very interesting all around the state, and we might be here for a while.
Anthony Chisholm, you, I imagine, though, are much happier being in that 43 seats position as opposed to the LNP.
Yeah, I am, and obviously a strong result in southeast Queensland that we focused on. I don't think we've had a look at Gavin or Bonnie for a while, so I think they're worthwhile having a look at. But the regional seats are a lot tougher, and it's really going to depend in a lot of them about who comes second or third in some seats between One Nation and Liberal as to where those preferences go. So I think Matt is right, but I think the Premier's call throughout the election campaign that it's either a majority Labor government or a mess. It certainly is a mess on the other side. So it is, from a LNP point of view, to be where they are with swings against them. Like even Tim Nicholls has got a swing against him with 10% on primary in Clayfield. So I think that shows you what's happening in the southeast corner.
You mentioned Gavin and Bonnie. What are you hearing from them?
Look, still very close, but again, Labor in with a chance. So in terms of picking up seats that we probably weren't quite expecting, but the type we're going to need to get to that 47, certainly eyeing off those two as a chance.
And look, I think the context here, though, is Queensland very rarely knocks out first-term governments, notwithstanding the last election. And for a first-term Labor government to be this difficult getting to a majority is not a ringing endorsement of what they've done in the first 3 years. There is a lot of frustration out there that has fed and given oxygen to minor parties. And we're seeing here that we might be very late into the night before the Premier will be able to say at all whether she has a majority tonight.
Stephen Miles?
Oh, we've had two LNP coalition governments in the last 30 years in Queensland and both were knocked out in their first term. So there is a bit of a pattern for Queenslanders voting out first-term governments, generally coalition ones. Let's see how the rest of these seats fall.
Just interested in some information that GetUp is now sending around. They did some exit polls on the Adani question, and they said it was incredibly influential. More than 50% in every seat GetUp held exit polls in. Maiwar, Mount Albany, Everton, Mansfield said they did not want the government to allow the $1 billion loan. So obviously that was a calculation that you guys made that GetUp says the exit polls are proving.
Certainly those results from GetUp are exactly what I was hearing when I was door knocking with Ali and Maiwar, that even people who were for the Adani mine are against the $1 billion loan. And I think that's a big problem for Malcolm Turnbull, who's proposing this.
All right, well, let's go and have a look at the latest figures for Maiwar, because we've got Scott Emerson standing by to have a chat to us. Scott Emerson, of course, as we've been saying, is facing a dual challenge from both the Greens and the ALP. Anthony Green, just give us the latest figures, mate.
What we're seeing at the moment is that Scott Emerson is clearly leading on the first preferences. I'm not sure if it's... Get the graphics, here we go. Scott Emerson is leading with 41% of the vote, from the Greens on 29% and the Labor Party on 28% of the vote. We've got a preference count in 10 of the 18 polling places, and we're estimating there's a swing of 7.8%, which would be enough to deliver. That's a preference count towards Labor, and it's predicting Labor would win the seat. But at this stage, the Greens are in second place, so it may actually predict that the Greens are going to win the seat. But whatever case it is, the swing is big enough to defeat Scott Emerson. Admittedly, we've got 54% counted, but then it's not a good position he's in at the moment.
OK, thanks, Anthony. Scott Emerson, with 54% of the vote counted, are you giving this away?
Well, look, I think it's going to be a tough fight, Matt, but look, we're still in it and we're not giving up anything at the moment.
So why has it come down so close for you? Is it simply because it's marginal? What are the reasons?
Oh, look, there's two reasons, clearly. There's a redistributed seat. That made it very hard to win. But then the second part was obviously the change of the voting system. As you know, Labor changed the voting system with 18 minutes notice. And the optional preferential voting system was a result of the Fitzgerald inquiry. Labor changed that to try to win seats like this and shore up the Green vote. And that's obviously been a very hard hurdle to overcome.
Look, on our panel, people have been saying you needed to get into the 40s on first preference to win here. You're at 41. Is that going to be enough for you?
Look, we've had a very strong number of people coming through pre-poll, and also in this seat, a very strong number of postal votes. The application numbers traditionally are about 3,000. We've had over 5,000 applications for postal votes. So those figures will play a significant role. They tend to favour the incumbent, but look, it's going to be a tough fight. It was always going to be a tough fight, given the new boundaries, given the change of the voting system, but I'm not a quitter. That's why I didn't leave this seat and run away like Stephen did. I made sure I stayed here, because this is my community, and I was going to fight it out until the polls closed.
Now, we have already spoken at length about the Adani issue. GetUp says it's been doing some exit polls in your seat, saying it was a big vote turner. Is that what you were finding? Because I know you're at the pre-polling booth quite a lot this time.
Yeah, I went through every booth in my electorate today talking to people. Look, clearly Adani was one of the issues, but other people said, look, we understand the need for jobs in regional Queensland particularly. We've got parts of regional Queensland at the moment with almost 60% youth unemployment. It's hard when you can't get your own job, but it's heartbreaking when your kids can't get work. And people understood the need to create jobs across Queensland, including in regional Queensland, places like Townsville, where we have high levels of unemployment and very high levels of youth unemployment.
But Scott, if it wasn't for the Adani issue, if that wasn't a problem for you, do you think you would have won this seat?
Oh, look, I think it was always going to be hard. As I said, it was always going to be hard because of the change in boundaries. There was almost half a new seat for me, but also particularly the change in the voting system. That's why Labor changed it. This optional preferential was a recommendation flowing from the Fitzgerald Inquiry report. And that's why Labor did that with 18 minutes notice. And that was always going to be hard. It was always going to see preferences lock in between Labor and the Greens. And that's why they did it, to try to win seats like mine, to save Jackie Trad in South Brisbane, to shore up Grace in McConnell. That's why they changed that voting system. With 18 minutes notice, they didn't take it to a committee. They didn't consult with the public. They did it and trashed the Fitzgerald reform process.
All right, Scott Emerson, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Deb Frecklington, the other feature of this campaign was Labor reminding everybody of the Newman government, and Scott Emerson was a minister under the Newman government. Do you think that has also had an impact for someone like Scott Emerson?
Yeah, look, it's typical Labor campaigning. I mean, we see it time and time again. You know, we had the Mediscare campaign during the federal election, and this time, you know, there was nothing positive about the Labor campaign. They didn't tell regional Queenslanders how they were going to give them jobs. They weren't telling any Queenslanders what they were going to spend in infrastructure, unless it was to save Jackie Trad's seat. They certainly didn't offer anything positive except fear smear, and that's obviously that's all they've got, so that's what they went on.
It was always going to be a very difficult cloud to get out from under, wasn't it? Particularly with your leader, Tim Nicholls, being Treasurer and driving that sort of unpopular privatisation program at the time.
Well, look, we've been very clear, and Tim Nicholls was very clear from the start of this campaign. We started on a very positive campaign, and we maintained that the whole way through, because that's what people want in Queensland, to obviously to hear from their political leaders a positive message, not just fear and smear, and that's all we've heard. And we've also had massive bankrolling of the Labor Party from the unions as well, and that's, you know, all accumulated to what those messages that they were running around Queensland trying to scare people with.
And Stephen Miles, how do you respond to Scott Emerson's accusation there that Labor changed to full preferential voting to remove people like him?
Look, I think that reform will benefit Labor in some places. It will benefit the LNP in many more, particularly where they will get elected on Labor's preferences. Our principled decision to put the LNP ahead of One Nation is going to save a bunch of LNP seats, whereas
that's exactly the same in Brisbane. We made a principled decision to put the Greens last, and that's going to save a bunch of your seats in Brisbane. So don't be a hypocrite, Stephen. I mean, you know, no, it's going to. No, it's not. You're going to win all the seats. All the seats in Brisbane. You're going to win heaps.
You made a
Brisbane on Greens
once.
preferences.
Out of 93 seats. One principled decision.
You're going to win. If you win Maywar, it'll be on Greens preferences.
All right,
easily on Greens preferences. You're just going to struggle necessarily to get into second place, but if you win Maywar, it'll be on Greens preferences. I'd hazard a bet you haven't got 50%. I think
Stephen held his own seat of Greens preferences.
Right, so. You know, you're all relying on the Greens in Brisbane, right? Only in seats where you get 50%, which is basically zero. You rely on Greens preferences, and we've made a principled decision to put them last.
Preferences that you'll get because of compulsory preferences. So the result of this has been to salvage.
But I'm not a hypocrite, Stephen. I'm not being a hypocrite here. You are. I'm not being.
You said earlier that the LNP was doing well in the regions. The LNP, the swing against the LNP in the regions is twice what it is against Labor. Well, the LNP is down 8% in the regions.
I know it's shocking that politicians are accusing each other of playing politics, but let's
and
just
hypocrisy.
And hypocrisy. That's right. Well, but let's just get some more results. We want to go up to the Townsville region, and let's kick off with Thurrangower, where Aaron Harper is the sitting MP.
Yes, and let's look at this. The LNP is back in second place here. One Nation is in third and Canada's on fourth. Just hold on those first preferences at the moment, because there's likely to be a strong flow of preferences from Terence Fox to Mark Thornton, which might put One Nation into second place. And at the moment, the Electoral Commission is delivering as a Labor versus One Nation preference count. Look at the change in vote that's occurring there. Labor down 8, LNP down 13, and a rise for both One Nation and Canada's Australian Party. And we are currently getting, on a Labor versus One Nation count, what we're getting is a swing, a small swing of 1.6. Well, we're getting, I think the graphic can go on if it can. Is the graphic going to go on? We've lost the graphics. Well, what's happening in Thuringowa is that I can do it on the touchscreen. That's what I can do.
With your mouse, I think.
With my mouse, because the touchscreen doesn't touch.
On your mouse screen.
So, except for some reason it can't load the data, so I don't know what's going on there. The total system failure.
Everywhere you turn, it's just not your night, Anthony.
What's happening in Thuringowa is that the Labor Party's on 33% and the LNP on 21%. It's just too low a figure. If I look at Mundingburra, the Labor Party's first preference in Mundingburra is, if everything's slowing down now, there's so much going on in the computer system, I can't even, come on, please come and Mundingburra, the Labor Party's only on 34, the LNP's on 23. We're getting a preference count there which is indicating a very small swing to Labor, but certainly we're not calling Mundingburra. And in Townsville, nearby, we've got the Labor Party's now sort of edging ahead. They've got their vote up to 35, but again, their first preference is well down, and the preference count is sort of helping them over the line at 50.7, but still in doubt. The odd ones are Hinchinbrook, where the LNP's on 27, Canada's Australia 22, One Nation 22, the Labor Party 20. No idea who's going to win that contest. That's a very difficult one to call. And Burdekin, which is to the south of Townsville, the Labor Party's on 35, the LNP on 31, with One Nation on 30. We're getting a preference count, which is we're not getting a preference count now. It sort of hasn't come through, but it's indicating it's sort of a pretty line ball game. So there's 5 seats around Townsville at the moment. We've got no idea whether we can call or not, because the first preference vote of the leading candidate is too low.
And most of those, Anthony Chisholm, were ALP seats.
Yeah, certainly we knew that they were going to be tough. I was there during the week, and there really is a strong anti-major party feeling there. But to be honest, I was surprised that we're still in the game in Thuringowa and Mundingburra in particular, and I thought Townsville would be close. So the fact that we're still competitive there, I think, is a good sign. And if we do pick up a Burdekin, then obviously that offsets any potential loss in the Townsville area.
What's behind the major anti-party feeling?
I think Matt touched on this before. I think it largely is the economic circumstances, and particularly from Townsville till you get down to the Sunshine Coast, high unemployment, a fairly negative mood, and that was there at the federal election campaign. I think it's still there. I think it's why you've seen a reasonably strong vote for One Nation. But I think the other thing to focus on from a One Nation point of view is that they're on 0 seats. And whilst there's still a chance to get maybe 1 or 2, that's a disastrous result for One Nation and for Pauline Hanson.
And already 2 significant losses for One Nation in Steve Dixon, the leader in Buderim, as well as Malcolm Roberts in Ipswich that we just heard before conceding defeat. Yeah, and I'd just like to dispel that myth around Ipswich. Pauline Hanson always likes to claim it as a heartland. They voted for her once, and she's never gone any good since then. So I think it's a strong result for Jen Howard and the Labor team out there. They've never taken it for granted. They work hard with Jim Madden. I was out there at pre-poll on Thursday, and I'm really pleased for them that they've seen off that One Nation threat and they can dispel that myth once and for all.
We're going to break out into agreement here between our 2 parties. I do think, yeah, yippee. I do think
it's the 2-party duopoly. That's what it is.
But the headline result for the One Nation Party is looking concerning for them at the moment. I think I can sort of get them 1 seat at the moment. They're competitive in another 3, but even if they got all of those, that's still underwhelming. They would have liked to have been above half a dozen the way they were talking. I can't see them getting there with these results at the moment.
All right, thanks, Senator Canavan. Well, we've got Alison Horn, our reporter, standing by in Buderim, which is Steve Dixon's seat. Al, what's happening there now?
Well, Jess, it's a lot more sombre mood than I guess we expected would be coming from the One Nation Battler Party, as it's been dubbed here tonight. A house party here in Steve Dixon's seat of Budrum. But as we saw a little earlier, Mr Dixon himself not completely confident of winning this seat. And as the polls would suggest, as the votes come in, it does look like One Nation will be without a Queensland leader. And that's a very difficult scenario for the party, given how much Pauline Hanson was talking up the party's chances at the beginning of the campaign when she was riding across the state on the Battler bus. She was very confident and talking the party would have the results that they saw in the 1998 election, which was 11 seats. And I think now it's quite clear that that's going to be a very different story tonight. Two big scalps already we expect down, Steve Dixon and Malcolm Roberts in Ipswich. So the party here not as happy as they would have hoped.
And we did also see Malcolm Roberts during the course of the campaign talking about One Nation holding the balance of power, and they'd issued a list of non-negotiable things when it came to dealing with the major parties. It must be pretty subdued there at the moment.
Yes, 6 demands they listed during the campaign, ranging from scrapping Labor's cornerstone in the southeast, the Cross River Rail project, through to setting up a coal-fired power station in North Queensland. They were some of the key deal breakers that One Nation wanted to put on the table if they were to hold the balance of power. But I think it is probably unlikely that they will be in that scenario now. Pauline Hanson, though, the One Nation leader who has very much been the face of this campaign in Queensland, she said that she's not quite giving up hope. She is still hopeful that One Nation will have at least 1 or 2 seats. And they went even further than saying, look, even if there isn't a huge result here, that the swing that some seats are seeing is, I guess, indicative of the volatility of voters, particularly in those regional seats we're seeing up north and in regional Queensland. Steve Dixon has said that he doesn't regret his defection from the LNP to One Nation, even if it does eventuate that he loses his seat here in Budrum. He says that he thinks that it has shed light on some of the issues here on the Sunshine Coast, and it's put the pressure back on the major parties to deliver for this area. He said he wouldn't consider going back to the LNP, and if he does lose, he definitely won't rule out running again.
And Alison Horn, any sign of Pauline Hanson there yet tonight?
Yes, Pauline has been here for about an hour now. She's been mingling with the voters and posing for what we've seen quite often on the campaign, the selfie. She is quite a popular figure, and I guess we saw that throughout the campaign as well, in that it wasn't Steve Dixon who was the face of the Queensland campaign. It was, in fact, their national leader, Pauline Hanson. So that gives you an idea of just how popular she is and how they use her face and her image to drive their vote across the state. Now, it obviously hasn't gone as far as they hoped it would tonight, and Senator Hanson, her mood has been more subdued than we have seen throughout the campaign. As I said, though, before, they are still hoping that they can pick up at least 1 or 2 seats.
All right, Alison Horn in Budrum on the Sunshine Coast, thanks so much. Well, now we're going to take a look at some of the seats that are likely to be gained by the ALP, and we're going to start in Redlands. Anthony.
And what we're seeing, these are 4 seats in the southeast which seem to have been quite strong for Labor. We're seeing Kim Richards is ahead on first preferences, One Nation 17. Peter Dowling, the former LNP member, ran in that seat and actually had a harder vote directing preferences to Labor. But on those first preferences, if Labor's ahead on first preferences, the LNP's got to come from behind. And at the moment, on a preference count we're seeing a 6% swing, and therefore Labor goes on to win Redlands. So that Kim Richards, she tried to win Bowman at the last federal election. We think that she's won Redlands. Aspley in the northern suburbs. Now, Bart Mellish is ahead on first preferences here on 40%. Tracy Davis on 36, 10% with the Greens, which is very significant, and One Nation on 9.4. Let's look at the change, the swing that's occurring there, 6.8%. So this is one of those Brisbane-based seats which is definitely swinging towards the Labor Party. And that's what we're seeing in the southeast, which is quite different from the rest of the state, which is why Labor has got more seats. And so at this stage we're saying Bart Mellish. I think was Anthony's chief of staff, or did he?
Well, still is.
Well, he might have a new job. And the next seat, Bonnie, Sam O'Connor from the LNP, he's ahead 40 to 38, but there's 10% there with the Greens and 2 other small parties. We are at the moment predicting on a polling place analysis a 5% swing and the Labor gaining that. Now, there's a big pre-poll to come, and it was impossible for me to estimate what the pre-poll will be in that electorate. So I think that one's a little bit more speculative than the others. But at this stage, it does look like Owen Holzberger, who tried to win Southport at the last election, has a very strong chance of winning Bonnie. But again, if we look at Gavin next door, we're seeing there's something very similar. Labor leads on first preferences, and there's 10% with the Green. And when we look at the two-party preferred, we're seeing a 4.4% swing. So in the southeast, where the One Nation is not polling well, and the Greens are polling well, what we're seeing is this relatively consistent pattern where the Labor Party is picking up seats. But that's not occurring in certain seats on the edges of Brisbane. It's not occurring in the north. I've just added McAllister to the doubtfuls category. Hetty Johnston is running as an independent. She's currently just behind the Liberal in 3rd place. She gets Green preferences ahead of Labor, and if a number of Green voters do that, then she will get ahead of the LNP and maybe pick up LNP preferences. So that would be, I think it's Melissa McMahon, the Labor candidate. It's McAllister, that's not clear. And we also have the Noosa case where it looks like the LNP's in really trouble holding Noosa against an independent.
All right, thanks, Anthony. Anthony Chisholm, looks like you're going to need a new chief of staff.
Yeah, I might be able to bring Scott Emerson if he's out of a job. But no, he's done a fantastic job. He's door knocked 2/3 of the electorate. I was out handing out with him today, and he's just been absolutely brilliant. So full credit to him. He's really deserved it because of all his hard work.
Yeah, Matt Canavan, we were hearing today that the LNP was really worried about Aspley. Were you expecting Redlands, Gavin, another sitting MPs dropping?
Well, no, all of those seats were certainly, they were all marginal, so they were always at risk. Certainly Aspley, and then on the Gold Coast it was a bit uncertain. The LNP of the last couple of elections have swept the Gold Coast. There's some redistributions this time, which made it a bit more challenging. So both Bonnie and Gavin were potentially in play.
Because there's a lot of seats where every election you go, well, it's a 50-50, we'll get some, we'll lose some. Are you getting any of those 50-50 contests?
Well, certainly in where we need now, the LNP needs to come home with, is those in regional Queensland, where they're very close. There has been a swing in two-party preferred terms to the LNP, but it's very, very close given the split vote. And they're the ones that are probably not going to be decided tonight, but they are in play for the LNP.
OK, well, in a moment we're going to head north to Thuringowa, and we've got the sitting MP, Coralie O'Rourke, standing by to talk to us. Anthony, how are things looking for her in Mundingburra?
Now let's look at these first preferences. Coralie O'Rourke had, I think it's Matthew Delagan from the LNP. So it's all happening a bit here, and I'm forgetting the pronunciations I so carefully practiced beforehand. But the Labor Party's on 33, the LNP 24, One Nation 16, Canada's Australia Party 14, and the Greens on 8. There is still, I think it's getting harder now for One Nation to get into 3rd place. So it's coming down to a preference count between Labor and the LNP. I'm starting to forget what I was given as the total count. You can see what's happened there with the first preferences. At this stage, we're predicting, I seem to be getting a preference count from the Electoral Commission between Labor and the LNP, which would work out to be a 2.7% swing to Labor. But it's a little hard to work out my data sources on these figures at the moment because the sources of the data is quite complex. But at the moment, that looks better for Labor than it did a little bit earlier in the evening.
Thanks, Anthony. Coralie O'Rourke, looking a little bit better for you. Is that the feeling that you have tonight?
Look, we've had a really good day today. It's been really positive out on the polling booths, having some fantastic conversations with local residents. And, that's just, we've run a very positive campaign. And at this point in time, I think it's probably a little bit too early to tell. So just here tonight to thank my volunteers for all the hard work that they've done.
Both of the leaders, Tim Nicholls and Anastasia Palaszczuk, spent a lot of time in your neck of the woods during the course of the campaign. You had been expecting this to be close.
Look, absolutely. I knew right from when the redistribution came through that it would be a tough battle. But as I said, we've run a very positive campaign, very much on the ground, having one-on-one conversations with local residents about what's important to them, what it was that we have delivered as government and what we want to do to continue working with them together as a community.
Jobs is a major issue around Mundingburra. What are you going to do in regards to that, and what kind of feedback were you getting from people who weren't happy about the state of the economy in North Queensland?
Look, recently we've had a lot of positive conversations around the direction that the economy is going. We have seen that unemployment has started to trend down. Obviously, we've still got a long way to go with regards to bringing it down to state average and making sure that we've got those positive job generating programs in place. The Skilling Queenslanders for Work, Back to Work program and Works for Queenslanders are all about putting local people into local jobs here in Townsville, and making sure that we've got the infrastructure spend here is about also, employing locals through local businesses.
What feedback are you getting on how your other Townsville colleagues are going?
Look, I think, we've all run a very positive campaign. I do wish them all the best tonight, and we'll see how the numbers roll out as the night progresses.
All right, Coralie O'Rourke, thank you so much for your time tonight.
So what we're seeing here is the Labor headquarters, where people are starting to gather as these results are starting to firm up. The figures that are coming in that is showing, as it stands with 50% counted, that we've got a 1% swing to Labor, maybe more. Anthony's still not calling it yet. Maybe we're in for a long night, but people are starting to gather at Labor headquarters. Can I just... Deb Frecklington, you're going to have to scoot off soon, but I just want to ask you, if this does turn out to be a Labor victory tonight, what happens to Tim Nicholls?
Well, look, that's a matter for Tim Nicholls and our party room, but we just can't be writing off the LNP at this stage. I mean, we've seen these figures. It is too hard to tell. There are so many seats that are still three-way contests, many seats that we're not even sure, with the count on which parties are being counted. So we're seeing that wild swings in some of those areas that we're unsure of. So, look, not conceding anything at this stage. And I think there's still seats that we're in for a great battle. And, so I think, like Anthony keeps saying, it'll be a long night. And I'm not writing anyone off yet.
I do want to ask you, if Tim Nicholls, if you lose, Tim, history would have it that there is a changeover in the leadership. Is it something that interests you, being the leader of the LNP?
There is so much more and so many more hours to go and so many more votes to be counted tonight. I mean, that's what I'm interested in. Out there in the Nanango electorate today, I really want to give a shout out to my everyone that was on the ground all across Queensland for the LNP. It was just, it has been a fabulous day for our helpers and our supporters. But look, it's a long time to go before this count is over.
Anything on the course of the campaign that you think, you should have, could have done better?
Look, we've had I think we've run a really positive campaign, Jess, and it's, it's been well received in certain areas, and I actually think that results in some of the seats that we have will certainly resonate with people in Queensland. But look, it's been a wonderful campaign, I think, and we'll just still wait and see how the votes go tonight.
All right, well, let's just see how the votes are going tonight. We've got 51% of the vote counted at 20 past 8. Anthony Green, how's it looking?
If we look at the overall vote, we're seeing, again, Labor about 36, the LNP 33, One Nation 13, Greens 10. The Green and One Nation vote has come down, but those major party figures have been roughly static for a long time now. The change in vote there, Labor down slightly, the LNP down substantially, One Nation up 12%. But as I said, the big difference is there. It's varied depending on where you come from in Queensland. The Labor vote is down further in regional Queensland, and that's hurt them in a number of seats. But in southeast Queensland, let me go to southeast Queensland. The figure is Labor's roughly the same. The LNP lost to One Nation. The results are quite variable from area to area. I noticed that Tim Mander in Everton has had a very good result. It's had a swing to him. But most other seats on the north side of the river are showing a 4 or 5% swing towards Labor. So it does show that it's varying from electorate to electorate. Maybe some of that sitting member factor is being shuffled up by the redistribution. Another thing to point out, at the last election, the early vote was very good for the LNP. It seems like the Newman government had a bad last week of the campaign. If you think back then, there was the whole Prince Philip controversy. Perhaps there was something in the pre-poll vote. And there's been a big increase in pre-poll vote, which makes me wonder, I'm just awfully cautious because I am like that. It's my nature. If we have a look at the seats we're definitely giving away, we're saying the Labor Party's on 44, LNP 37, and Katter's Australia Party 2. And we're saying a few more seats which are likely we get to 46, 37. I'm going to have a look at that again because that's looking high again. I have been having to suppress the predictions we've got because we've got preference estimates, we've got the wrong preference counts coming in, and I think some of our predictions are precipitous, so I'm having to sort of suppress some of them. So I think 46 is the maximum I can get Labor to at the moment. I've had to sort of alter a few numbers there to sort of override what were precipitous predictions. But look, Labor will end up with more seats than the LNP, but it's not clear yet whether someone can get a majority.
Thank you, Anthony. Well, in a moment, we're going to go to the Gold Coast and to Surfers Paradise, which is the LNP's safest seat. John Paul Langbroek is standing by to talk to us. But first, Anthony Green, how is he faring against Labor's Tony Walker?
Oh, this looks like a much more traditional election result, certainly for South Surfers Paradise. Always one of the safest seats. It was the only seat that the Nationals retained in southeast Queensland in 2001. John Paul Langbroek's well ahead there with 63% of the vote from Tony Walker, who was only announced just before the election campaign. Change in vote that's occurring there. You can see a sort of slight shift from others to the major parties. But the key thing is just look at the two-party preferred. There's a 3% swing, which is sort of what we're seeing in most of the Gold Coast, and but that doesn't affect the LNP majority in Surfers Paradise. And John Paul Langbroek is easily re-elected in Surfers Paradise.
Mr. Langbroek, thank you for your time tonight. Might not be.
Thanks, Jess. That's great news. Thank you.
Might not be such good news for some of your other colleagues, but you're feeling pretty happy about that.
Oh no, look, obviously I'm a team player, I've shown that in the past, and it's very disappointing. I'm here at the Southport Yacht Club with my supporters and volunteers, but it's really disappointing, of course, to have seen some of our members prospectively losing their seats, and overall a difficult path to victory for us.
Yes, people like Scott Emerson, Tracy Davis, these are people who have been your colleagues for some time in the ministry under Newman and now in the shadow ministry. To see them potentially go this evening, what's that like?
Well, it's really sad and it's difficult, just as there are people who'll be very excited and buoyed by their own results and coming into the Parliament, like I did in 2004. But it's one reason why I chose not to do a TV panel tonight, because in the 2015 election, when we had a major turnover, I found it really difficult to watch people's pictures being flushed down the toilet and things like that, when these are friends and they have friends and family, and many of those people struggled to find employment after they'd lost their seats.
What about elsewhere on the Gold Coast? Because there are 11 seats, in play there tonight. Are you concerned about, what would appear to be leaning towards Labor in a lot of those seats?
Well, Jess, I haven't seen enough details from the other seats to be able to comment on that. As I understand it, the two that are most prospectively in play are Bonnie and Gavin, where the Premier came today to campaign in the seat of Bonnie but didn't front in Gavin. But I'm not sure. I know that lots of resources have been put into those seats because Labor are desperate to get a foothold on the Gold Coast, where they haven't had one since the last election.
John Paul, you were leader and deputy leader at one point. Tim Nicholls has only been opposition leader for the last 18 months. How did he perform, do you think, under the pressure of an election campaign?
Jess, I thought he performed really well. When I looked at the structure of this campaign in terms of the media management, the policy announcements and the coordination with shadow ministers and the media message that was out there, I thought that it was a really, really good campaign. So it's really disappointing to see that that has not resonated, notwithstanding changes to the electoral laws that may have made things more challenging, in the sense that we basically have had three-cornered contests, as we used to in the past, but the people who are on our side, supposedly, of the electoral equation have preferenced against us, which never used to happen in a three-cornered contest. So there have been other challenges as well, but overall I thought it's been a very good campaign.
Queenslanders never quite warmed to Tim Nicholls, though, did they? I mean, we saw him consistently trailing behind Anastasia Palaszczuk in the preferred Premier stakes.
Look, I think that is the travails of being an opposition leader. I have seen, in my time in the Parliament, when Lawrence Springborg was the leader, when Jeff Seeney was the leader, when I was the leader, and Anastasia Palaszczuk was the leader coming into the 2015 election, the only time I've ever seen an opposition leader who people said was going to win was when Campbell Newman replaced me. So it's a difficult job being the opposition leader. I've supported Tim Nicholls all the way through, and the important thing is it's a really tough job. I've done it, and unless you've done it, you don't know how tough it is.
All right, John Paul Langbrook in Surfers Paradise, thank you for making time for us tonight.
Thanks, Jess.
Right, we are 2.5 hours into our coverage, so it does mean that we're going to have to bid farewell to one of our panellists tonight, Deb Frecklington. Has to take her leave. Thank you so much for your time tonight, Deb Frecklington.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Jess. It's been great to be here.
All right, and we will bring you a replacement very shortly, but we're going to take a quick break.